Oh my gosh. If only the listeners could see how much beard we have in this podcast episode. We have more beard in this episode than all of the hipster indie burger joints in Portland. My goodness, everybody. Welcome to What Magic Is This? A podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and we have a three-way conversation here. I haven't done one of these in quite some time, but I thought that with this episode, it would probably be for the best because we're going to be talking about something today that I actually don't know a ton about. So I'm going to be leaning on my guests quite a bit for this one. And my guests for this show are absolutely perfect because we are going to be talking about hypnosis. And joining the show, I have two former guests of the podcast. The first is Mr. Lance Baker, who is a Reiki master and hypnotist based out of Newcastle, Australia. He is the head of the Healing Clinic branches of healing. Lance, welcome back to What Magic Is This? We talked to you last time about a really strange figure who could probably do his own hypnosis, Mr. Emmanuel Swedenborg. But I just want to know, how are things this year? How are you doing?
Things are great. Things are great. Moving my clinic half hour away to Maitland, which nobody knows around the world. Sojukas is a little bit easier to say. I'm having fun. I found out since then that Introduction to Swedenborg was great. I didn't realize how much of a link he had to the hypnosis world. There's a book out there about Swedenborg and mesmerism, of how they dovetail and how so many early Swedenborgians were also into mesmerism. So it was a perfect key fit for me to be tied into that one. That I was like, wish I knew some of that stuff when I was on. But that was the point. I picked one I didn't know about.
Amazing. Well, that will be in the show notes. We'll find this book and we'll put it in the show notes.
I still haven't read it, I'll be honest.
Okay.
It's on my to-do list. It's in my massive pile of books that Doug's told me I have to read as well.
Sorry, everybody, for everybody's enormous book lists. Our other guest today is the return, not of the king, but of the wizard, Mr. Devin Person. Devin is a podcaster with This Podcast Is a Ritual, one of the finest, funnest, and dare I say, just it's such a carefree, great podcast, as well as a hypnotist himself. Devin, you were on our show talking about wizards. And as I was saying earlier, people love this one. It's not too often where I do something where I just have fun with the topic and people just enjoy it. Devin, you're a full-time hypnotist now. How does it feel to be the guy? Did you get do you guys get like a gold watch or something? Sorry, it's really cliche, but what happens when you become a hypnotist? Do you get like an epaulette or something like that, or what occurs? But you're
you
doing
get to
the
make up fancy initials and put them after your name, and then
okay. Yeah. How's your year been, Devin?
It's great. So I'm a part-time hypnotist, part-time wizard, full-time, the combination of those. But yeah, it's great. I quit my day job and launched my hypnotherapy business here in Louisville, Kentucky last year. And after many, many years of walking around in star-spangled robes and wearing a pointed hat, telling people I'm a wizard, I'm enjoying the magic of telling people I'm a hypnotist and having them, instead of asking, oh, what is wizardry all about? They go, I have a problem. Can you help with that? And so it really, it gets me out of the way. And it's hilarious because I've been offering one-on-one wizard consulting service where I would do hypnosis for years. And no one ever really took me up on that. And then as soon as I started saying, I'm a hypnotist, they're like, I have anxiety or I have a phobia. I can't drive over bridges. Can you help? And so it's been really fun getting to help people using magic rather than talking about using magic.
How long have you been doing hypnosis, Devin?
I did my training in New York in 2017.
Okay.
So I was using it in public performances. I did a lot of corporate meditation where I would, tell HR, it's going to be a guided meditation. And then I would use hypnotic language and everyone would be like, that's the best guided meditation I've ever had.
Nice.
I forgot where my body was. And so I was using hypnosis for a while, but this is the first year that I've been, seeing clients in an office on a regular basis.
So about 5 years, hypnosis has been your thing.
Where I discovered hypnosis goes back much, much further.
Okay.
But I had like a reintroduction to it, and I was already on my journey to become a wizard. And I was like, this is the secret sauce I've been looking for. I think we all, as magical practitioners, have to confront the thing where we're not going to summon a dragon. We're not going to fly visibly into the air. And it's a little underwhelming when someone's like, oh yeah, do magic. And you're like, well, hold on, let's make a sigil. And you're going to have to wait like 3 to 6 weeks for it to come true. And it's probably not going to be exactly what you wanted. Whereas hypnosis, you can give someone an experience where they're like, oh, I can't feel my hand anymore. Something crazy is happening. Like, what's going on here? So it's very fun.
Awesome. Lance, how about yourself? How long has hypnosis been a part of your life, and how long have you been practicing it?
I think it's 8 years since I started practicing it. I've been full-time with it for close to 7 years, but I used to be in sales and management. So I did a bunch of classes that were sales classes, but in hindsight, I can see they were NLP classes, which is a weak version of hypnosis. So,
yeah.
So sorry the NLPers out there. I've just insulted you, but come get some better training off some awesome trainers that are out there that teach hypnosis, and add that to your tool bag and you will be amazing.
Yeah.
But
Awesome.
yes, so I did a lot of that, and then I was taught how to use NLP in the dirty ways for convincing people to spend money they didn't want to spend. And yeah, later on worked out that was hypnosis.
Amazing.
Like Devin, I've done many of the guided meditations where I used hypnotic language. I crossed that threshold a little bit bigger than doing it with HR. I did it at the police academy.
Oh, wow.
Just like the movies, all 48 of them, right? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Terrible.
But I had somebody up the front hooked up to one of those heart math machines where you can see what the effect is on their body. And like, it just went dunk.
Crazy.
And I'm like, wow, meditation is amazing. I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Meditation. Gentlemen, let's jump right into it here. So we've all seen the movies, not Police Academy, but we've all seen the movies where hypnosis is used. We've all probably seen at some point we go to a bar and there's a hypnosis show and it's all wonderful. A lot of people have a lot of ideas about hypnosis. So I want to start this one off on a bit of a set things right tone. But what isn't hypnosis?
I can jump in and take this one.
Sure.
I'm sure Lance has to do a similar spiel with new clients because everyone does come in with a lot of misconceptions. And I think the first and foremost one is the idea that you are surrendering your will and personal control. And I think this is very funny because people will have two immediate reactions to hypnosis. One, is that real? And two, that sounds scary. And I love that it's like, we don't think it does anything. And we're also terrified that it's going to turn us into a zombie, like simultaneously. But hypnosis is about giving suggestions, and they are suggestions. That is exactly it. So when you give someone a suggestion that makes sense to them and they say, yeah, I would like to do that, then they can follow it. And the way that I always describe it to new clients is, you are driving the car. I'm just a really good passenger. And so that means if I say, hey, do you like blueberry pie? Because there's a really good diner up here that serves amazing blueberry pie. You go, yeah, I do. And we go to that diner and you're like, this was really good blueberry pie. And we get back in the car and I'm like, do you want to watch the sunset? Because there's a really cool hill where we can go watch the sunset. And you go, I do. And that like lets us go places that you don't know how to get to on your own. But you're still driving. You're still accepting each suggestion as we go.
I agree. That was really good.
All right. So then let's ask you, Lance, then. What exactly is hypnosis to you?
Oh, well, that's the hairier question.
You do have the beard for it. So
I do have the beard for it. So it depends on if you want to be technical or if you want to be how I work. So the technical term of hypnosis comes from hypnos, of Greek, of sleep, and it's it's linked with like trying to keep people in that hypnagogic sort of state that's guided and hold them in this spot where they can have a lucid dream, essentially with suggestions tied to it. You've experienced with me how I work quite often. I don't always. I do definitely use trance-based things and I use energetic-based things as well, that I work with conversation with another part of your consciousness. So I kind of do cross that threshold where you do lose control because they get you to give up control of part of your nervous system. With what we did was your arm, and part of your mind took over that, and you had that weird experience where your arm was moving and you knew you weren't moving it.
It's really bizarre. It's such a strange feeling.
Yeah, so I could teach it a way of communicating with me that we could have an hour conversation of back and forth where I could find out where this deeper part of you was at with taking on board my suggestions. If it wanted blueberry pie to see the sunset and set it on that path, and you got the success of what we asked for. But I also work with mesmerism, which is not hypnosis, but what hypnosis evolved out of, and it pairs well, but it's night and day different. So, hairy answers.
I love it.
And the comments section will be filled with, no, it's this.
Yeah, I think that's important to recognize at the top, is that the history of hypnosis is a history of disagreeing about what is this weird thing. And I think as we talk about the history, we'll see there's been a lot of like peeling away of the layers where someone's like, this is the important part. And then somebody else comes along and goes, I think we can actually get rid of that. And it's gotten to the point where now the debate in the more academic circles is there even such a thing as hypnosis? Not is this real? Because the evidence is quite convincing that there is a real phenomenon here that works for people. Like that is not in debate anymore. But the idea of, is trance a unique state of consciousness, or is all of the hypnotic phenomenon just basically like responding to authority and using your imagination and these sort of games? I'm in the camp that I think trance is a pretty distinct and noticeable state. I think anyone who's ever experienced trance is like, subjectively, you're like, yeah, that felt like a thing. It wasn't just, I felt like the guy was telling me to do it, so I did it. It feels different, especially like Lance said so well, when you're speaking to that unconscious part and you're getting that to act, because that is the illusion that we live under all the time, where we're like, I had an idea, I decided to do something, when really that's stuff that's bubbling up from behind the curtain backstage. And when you actually get to work with what's backstage, you can create more profound change.
I have to ask both of you this question. It's been about 200 years or so since we've said that hypnosis is it's a thing. There's no one definition of it, but it's certainly a thing. Why do you think that there's such controversy around hypnosis to this day? Like, why is it that some scientists are still like just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, being like, no, there's no such thing. Like, we're talking about a whole bunch of different specific things. Why does hypnosis court so much controversy in whatever circles it tends to manifest?
Because the books for years were only in the witchcraft section. Of libraries. That's what it has been filed under for years. It's too weird and woo, and people don't like weird and woo. If they can't test it with a machine and know what it is in this materialistic world, no, thank you. And that, I think, is what that barrier is. And the old movies where they implied the hypnotist would say something and take control of your will, and you'd be their puppet as well. That scare factor would be part of it too. My view.
I think there's two important things to add on to that. One is Freud originally pursued hypnosis and then wasn't very good at it. All of his contemporaries were like, yeah, he was a pretty lousy hypnotist. And so he discarded hypnosis and said, this isn't worthwhile, and then got in dreams. And then Freud was such a huge influence that everyone that came after was kind of like, Freud already looked into hypnosis. It wasn't worthwhile. It doesn't belong in psychology. Like, get it out of here. And then the other important part is that, like Lance is saying, hypnosis is about subjective experience, and it's there's a science to it, but it's very much an art. And so there's this idea of like how hypnotizable are people. And basically there's a bell curve distribution. So some people, especially if you have some sort of brain trauma or, inability to focus, and basically like it would limit your ability to live everyday life, that would mean that you couldn't be hypnotized just for the pure fact of not having the faculties for it. Most people are somewhere in the middle. And then what I think is really interesting is this group that are highly hypnotizable. And one of the books that I read where this kind of unlocked so much about the history of magic for me as well is this idea that there's some people who are what are called highly imaginative people, and their experience is just so night and day different from regular people. Like, I am not a very visual person. Like, if I close my eyes and think of a tree, I'm thinking of the concept of a tree. I'm getting things coming and going. Other people are like, I see the tree, I could draw it for you. There's a bird on a branch. Like, I didn't put the bird there, it's just there. And I think when you go see a hypnosis stage show or something, they're selecting the most hypnotizable subjects in the room. So you're seeing stuff that seems crazy. And then when you're the scientist that tries to replicate it, also try not to buy into it because you need to remain objective, which means that you're not working with it, then it's very easy for you to disprove it, although all you're proving is your ability to disprove things that you don't want to try. And so
science,
that led to this pattern where we wanted to make it academic. So we would get a script, have a grad student read it to a bunch of people. Anyone that went into trance was hypnotizable. Anyone that didn't was unhypnotizable. That gave us percentages, and that's how we approached it. And then Milton Erickson and more modern schools of hypnosis have said, if the person's not going into trance, they're not the problem. Your approach is the problem. Try something different. Figure out what works for that person. Somebody who is incredibly resistant, you can use that resistance to get them into a very deep trance very quickly. It's all about like that Aikido idea of kind of working with their momentum and flow rather than just trying to be so strict and materialist about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I believe both of you are correct. It is a subjective art, I'm going to say the word art, with objective results, and that is frightening to a lot of people. So what is the, because it's what magic is this, but what is the prehistory of the practice that we call hypnosis? I read some stuff about there was a physician in Persia who was pretty good at what we would call using trances, but would one of you be able to say, like, before the big character that kind of puts hypnosis on the stage, what was going on with hypnosis?
I think globally it was everywhere. Like, you look at every indigenous culture, they had a version of trance that they would use, and somebody in the tribe was good at that. The whole tribe was good at that. And it was generally used for healing. It was used for prophecy. It was used for celebration. It was used for connecting with spirit. That's the foundation of the human race, I think. But yeah, there was like Avicenna was the first guy who wrote about trance in a medical context a long, long time ago. But that's where modern medicine come from as well.
My take is that it's a lot like that idea of the blind men all feeling the elephant and getting different things. That there is something about the human imaginative experience that occurs in that state between waking and dreaming, and all kinds of weird stuff happens there. And I would include a lot of astral projection, a lot of like Robert Monroe stuff that he talked about feels like very hypnosis adjacent. Yoga Nidra, there's so many other things, like even various forms of like advanced meditation, I think are accessing this state that we still don't fully understand. We've gotten different handles on. And I think the other important thing to remember, both with magic and hypnosis, is the importance of belief. And we live in a fragmented cultural wasteland where we don't grow up in a single belief system. We grow up with all kinds of information coming at us. And, part of being like a Christian in the modern era is like clinging tight to old school beliefs and like not letting those doubts like come in and pollute it. But that is such a different experience than if you grew up in a single culture and there was no other source of information. And so this is how things work. So when I'm working with a client contemporarily, I'm having to explain hypnosis, introduce them to this idea in language that makes sense and is meaningful to them, which I think is very different than, grandma's sick, let's go to the shaman who's going to drum, and like we're going to go into trance, and I'm going to see that demon fly out of her face because that's what I believe I'm going to see, and that is the culture that I live in. So I think it's hard when we get outside of cultures that are not our own to fully understand what it's like to live in that reality tunnel. Not that people never question anything, but there was no comparison shopping in the same way now. I think it's very different to try and believe magic in the face of cultural resistance versus believing magic because that's just how the world works.
Very well put, gentlemen. All right, let us introduce the big one, the big guy. So Mesmer, who is this and why is he such an important figure, not just to hypnosis, but to the occult and the esoteric in general?
Lance, are you do mesmerism?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I'm going to let you handle this one. That is fascinating to me. Do you have a baquette? Or you got iron rods? Like, I want to know all about this.
No, I don't have a baquette, but I just use my hands and my eyes and project energy. So Mesmer, he didn't speak at all, which was what mesmerism was based on. It was an energy healing process. It started with him being influenced by like Paracelsus and Richard Mead and the influence of like the planetary bodies, the sun and the moon's effect on the earth would change the tides. So it's got this magnetic influence on animals. So he called it animal magnetism, not mesmerism. Mm-hmm. And he used to use magnets in his hands. He was trained by Father Maximilian Hell, who's got a crater on the moon named after him. But they used magnets and did these passes of magnets down people's bodies to create healing. And eventually he got to realize that we could get this, he called it a magnetic fluid, coming through us and through our hands without these magnets. And we could just do passes of our hands over people's bodies. And they ended up going into these trance states where they would just zone out. And quite often people would go into like an ecstatic catharsis where they would be twitching and convulsing on the floor. And sometimes it would be like orgasmic, like the whole name's faded from me now. Orgone, William Reich.
Reich.
Like that concept of what he found was the same as what Mesmer had found, that this would happen with a lot of people. And it was believed Mesmer didn't do anything with communication with anything inside of people, but I have translated an old bit of text where it said he did hear people talking, and he said his terms was ignore the oracle. He just would like ignore whatever people were saying with it, that was just weird stuff that was happening when they were in this trance. But when people come out of it, they were healed of their stuff. He healed his famous bit of one of the things he healed was this pianist who was blind, and he'd healed her and she could see again. But then nobody was interested in watching the lady who could play piano and see. They were interested in the lady who could play piano that was blind, and it come back. But it also was she lived with him when she got the healing. When she returned to her parents, she got blind again. And so was that because of the pianist thing and her parents making an income offer, or was the house full of trauma and her consciousness creates the blindness again to hide her from that trauma? I don't know. But so Mesmer worked very much like that it was just hand passes, quiet things. He used sound healing a lot as well. He played crystal bowls as well. He had Mozart come and play in his gardens while he did healings. And he used those baquettes that Devin just talked about, which were these big tubs full of glass shards and iron filings and water. And he charged these buckets of stuff up, and they had these iron rods coming out of it, and he didn't have to heal everybody. Then he could have big parties and people would just hold this iron rod and they'd get the energetic healing happen through this big battery that he would have charged up. And that is mesmerism. But because he was talking about this invisible fluid, he was a whack job and a con man. And that's the way that most hypnosis schools just talk about it. It's like hypnosis started from this guy who accidentally found suggestion and talked about this woo-woo stuff. And we forget about him because he was a con man, but he indirectly discovered placebo. So let's focus on that.
Which, to me, this is the most bizarre thing, because as a student of the history of the occult, which I am, Mesmer is another one of these characters, like the person that I talked to Lance about before, Emanuel Swedenborg. He was so influential. And if you're involved in this kind of stuff, like magic, and you find the history of magic, if you do not know who Mesmer is, and you do not know the things that he did and the influence he had on thousands of people, then you don't really know the history of this stuff. So Mesmer was around 17th, 18th century. I believe he died in 1734. Very interesting figure. And yeah, I will say he is worth knowing. And it just, some of the biographies, I've read 2 biographies on Mesmer, and they're just some of the most interesting. It's and not in the way where we read the book and you're like, oh, these people are so stupid. This guy was ahead of his time with a lot of things. And we're only now starting to look back. I believe that, well, not only now, over the last 100 years, we're starting to look back and be like, hang on, this guy got a lot of things right as well. He did a lot of other stuff, but he did a lot of things right.
If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have psychology either. Like psychology evolved out of this.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible point. And I think the other thing that is so like, it's really important to remember the cultural context, and that this was not someone going into a therapist office to talk. This was people like in aristocratic circles coming to have this experience with the expectation of having that experience. And a very important part of Mesmer's healing was this kind of moment of cathartic crisis where people would convulse and they would fall to the ground and have these, seizure-like experiences. And yeah, I think I'm a little more skeptical about Mesmer and some of his ideas, but I think it's just fascinating the culture of that time of people being interested in these ideas and wanting healing, and you can see so many parallels between Paris in that time and like what the equivalent would be in like Los Angeles today, of rich people being like, oh, what's the new health fad? Like, I'm having activated charcoal kale smoothie and it's amazing. And like all of the stuff that some of it you look back on and go, okay, that was a load of horseshit. And other stuff you look back on and go, hey, there was like, that was actually really quite valuable. And it makes me think about, if you go to a thrift store and look in the record section, the biggest sellers of the 70s were like Barbra Streisand and Engelbert Humperdinck, but no one really talks about them anymore, even though they had so many millions of more records sold than like the Velvet Underground or the Modern Lovers or like a Cool Band.
Okay.
And I think mesmerism is similar, where if you were looking at papers, like newspapers in the 1800s, you would have seen like demonstration of animal magnetism at the blah 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 hall, and like all of these things were so common. And I think then the culture gets embarrassed about that and then tries to forget about it and kind of shoves it under the rug.
Very fascinating.
Yes, and like I said, he had Mozart come and play his gardens with it. So it's like, yeah, Madonna's playing today at the Crystal New Age Center in Los Angeles Central, blah blah blah. That people are like, yeah, we've got to go to this thing, and Madonna's going to be there. It's going to be awesome. He was like in the scene. Yeah, he was in the scene for sure. And mesmerism definitely had a rise and fall with popularity, and Mesmer himself being kind of pushed out of those circles.
What did Mesmer do that was so, because he was breaking some taboos. A lot of people found like what he did was a little bit sketchy. Can we talk a little bit about why he went away for a little while?
They did 3 royal commissions to get rid of him. So the first 2, he passed. They had all these people to check on him, and they're like, no, it works. They're getting the results. And they're like, no, we've got to do this again. We want him out. Mostly because like he's mostly working with women. Some of them are having orgasms. Like, red flag.
How dare they?
Culture doesn't like it. And he was also connected with a lot of the people who were involved in the French Revolution as well. So, like, that's what's on the horizon to come. So people in power would have felt this tension there that like, well, let's get rid of this guy as well. Another extra reason. So the first two, he just passed. The third one, he didn't. And the third one is where they focused not on the results of the healings. They focused on this fluid that they couldn't see it. Plus they did, they wouldn't let Mesmer actually be part of it.
It was his student that was under the examination.
It was his student. I've got a letter I translated of Mesmer's where he's writing to them saying, this is a joke. Like, he doesn't know everything I know. I haven't taught him everything. You can't use him. You've got to use me. But no, they used him. It also had Ben Franklin was part of it. Right. And so Ben was over in France looking for support in America, looking for troops. And he's asking for that. And they said, well, you got to be on this panel and do this thing. We want mesmerism gone. And he got his troops. So was there a bribery deal in there? I don't know. It sounds very much like it to me.
Conspiracy and a hypnotism episode. Yes. I like it. I'm enjoying this.
Yes. But I think it's similar because it's like kind of where people acknowledge we sort of started to talk about placebo, but it's this weird thing where, I mean, placebo itself is such a fascinating phenomenon. You literally like medical research is based on the idea of you have to control to get rid of this powerful effect. And yet we're so quick to be like, yeah, it's just placebo. Yeah, that's not important. Like, why? It's just this magical thing that we don't understand that heals people. Like, get rid of that. And so, yeah, I think the Mesmer thing was really for anyone that's ever argued with like an atheist where they don't define terms and they're like, you think God is this bearded guy in a cloud. And I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. Haven't said that. You're saying that. I think it's similar where, I mean, Mesmer was saying there was this real fluid here, but they got really stuck on that. Like, we can't prove that there's a real fluid here, so therefore throw it out, rather than saying, hold on, why are people having these experiences? There's something here. Let's dig into it.
Amazing. Love it. Yeah. I would love to do an episode on Mesmer at some point. Hopefully he'll be another member of the Fool's Gallery here on the show, but we have to keep moving. So much to talk about. Oh my God. So what happens to hypnosis after the death of Mesmer? What happens to the story of hypnosis? There's a couple of names that people might bump up against. One is James Braid, but take us from Mesmer to Freud, if you two can.
So I'd love to take a quick detour to just contemporaneous to Mesmer, someone who heard about Mesmer, and I'm going to pronounce the name wrong, so sorry, French listeners, but the Marquis de Poisson, I don't know, like my Spanish pronunciation there, but he was like, oh, there's something here, and was experimenting with it, and he was the one that first started to peel back some of the accoutrement that Mesmer had gotten, like the banquets and the magnetized trees and all of that kind of stuff. And he was realizing that there was more of like the talking and things were like starting to form there. But I think one of the fascinating things, again, to remember is this is a very class-based society. And so a lot of what he was doing was like, hey, stable boy, come over here. We're going to like try some stuff. And then getting these like really incredible trance results where, just like phenomenal stuff that even I, as a practicing hypnotherapist, it's like, I don't see clients just, I mean, I don't make them do it, but like, I think modern people have different experiences. And when you read about some of this stuff in the past, it's like wild. And I think there was a very interesting dynamic where when you're in a class-based society and there's people who are literally your lord, and their job is to tell you what to do and you fucking do it, that makes you amenable to suggestion in a very, very powerful way. And there's been later studies that also found, soldiers make great hypnotic subjects and things like, because if you're already like, you tell me what to do, I'll do it. Then when I say your hand floats into the air, like, you're like, oh, it sure did. But then, yeah, like I think mesmerism came to America and was this current of, people putting on these demonstrations that were very popular, but also the establishment was skeptical of and derided. And it was, like the way your aunt's going to go see John Roberts do a speaking to the dead kind of thing. It's like popular but not critically accepted. And yeah, do you have any other touchstones before we work our way up to Braid that you want to jump on, Lance?
Yeah, I think Poisika is like the figure. I think he's the one everybody needs to know about, because he is the man. He's got 2 books I'm working on translating right now, because he's ignored, and he is the bomb. So he also pissed off Mesmer because of this, because he'd communicate with the Oracle. He would be communicating with some other element inside of somebody. And he's the one who introduced this talking. He's the one who really is what turned this thing into psychology. He's the first one who did some form of what modern day psychology is, and what the way I work with hypnosis, of this communication with something inside. He's the man who did that. So Mesmer said, you're not doing animal magnetism. Don't use that word. So he called it somnambulism, which is another word that gets falsely used today, of what Devin was talking about, of that small end of the bell curve of what stage hypnotists work with.
The bell end.
Call them the bell end. They call them somnambulists, which are just people who are really easy suggestible. But in this terminology, that wasn't it. So it's a French term for sleepwalker, but it would be the people who, when you put them in the trance, something else would take over, and they would be able to walk and talk. So the Poisika, his family owned cognac vineyards, and they still do. Obviously, he doesn't, because he's not around anymore, but that family's farm is still going. And one of the first people he worked with was this young boy, Victor Race, who was just like a peasant boy who ate grapes. And the boy was obviously like uneducated because of his status. He had a stutter, and so his speech was pretty obvious of his class. But when Poisika put him in this trance, he started talking, and he was able to say what the cure was for his illness that the boy didn't know. His speech had no stutter. His speech was eloquent and used language that boy had never been taught and didn't know. Like, it was so much more intelligent than him. It knew of everything of young Victor Race's life, but Victor didn't know of this other character. And so Poisika would commune with this other, which is what ended up being labeled as the subconscious later on. And so somnambulalism was all about create trance and talk to something else. And so when mesmerism, like especially in US and in the Theosophical Society and stuff like that, they're actually not really doing mesmerism. They're doing somnambulism with this communication with the other. And we worked, and I did the thing where I talk with your hand, with that communication just as a nervous system thing. But quite often I do take it to that next level where it'd be automatic writing, and then I take it further where it's direct voice, like this Victor Ray scenario where your mouth is moving and you're hearing a different voice, and it's close to you, but it's not quite you. And sometimes that can be in a channeling context, but more often than not, it's some deeper part of you. It's absolutely you, but it's a hidden part of inside of you that knows more about you than you know, and it knows why you do the things you do. It knows what's wrong inside your body and how to fix it. And it's just bizarre as hell. And so this guy is pretty interesting and powerful. And he had that military link as well. He was like an officer. So
crazy. I remember reading about this just like on in an article, but I didn't realize that both of you hold this gentleman in such high esteem. He's just, I'm talking about Mesmer, but this guy sounds like the real deal.
Yes,
it's a similar kind of situation to like your sex magic episode, right? Like everyone wants to talk about Crowley, and you're like, no, right. Pascal Beverly Randolph, like this is the person. And we're jumping around here, but when I was living in New York, I have a friend who had done stage hypnosis when he was in college, and I was like, hey, I want to put on like a Victorian parlor like hypnosis show. Like I want to have like the whole crowd is going to be the volunteers, and we're going to like serve drinks and food and like have it be like an experience. And when I was working to prepare the show with him and chatting about it, I'm like, dude, like it's hard because I believe in it, but I'm like still skeptical. He's like, I'm exactly there with you. He's like, I've seen the craziest shit, and I'm still like, wait, is this real? And his story of like, he was in Atlanta doing this for like sororities and, bachelorette parties and stuff. And there was some group that he was doing it with. And one of the hypnosis games was, all right, you now speak this alien language. That's the only language you know. It's this alien language, and you're trying to tell us something. And then this other girl, you speak that alien language too, but you also speak English. So you're going to translate for us. And these are like regular sorority girls. These were like not the ones that were like, I'm a comedic genius, I'm like a great improviser. They were just regular people. And he was like, this girl starts speaking, and it's clearly a language. It's not meep moop. It's like it has syntax, it has repeating words, like she is saying something. The other girl immediately starts speaking the exact same language the same way, and then we'll even ask clarifying questions, and they'll like talk back and forth before she translates what's going on. And he's like, I had no idea what was happening. He was like, so I think this is where we get into weird territory with magic, what I find fascinating and frustrating, because I feel like often in the middle, where I think the people who want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I'm like, no. And then the other people who are like going overboard and like, this can cure anything. I'm like, no. And it's this weird thing where it's like we don't have 100% access to it, but weird shit does happen with this state.
So James Braid, why is this gentleman noteworthy in the history of hypnosis?
He was for a long time labeled as the guy who coined the term hypnosis. None of his writings actually used the word hypnosis. He used the word hypnotism. But he was the first guy in English to be writing a lot about it. He wrote in medical journal after medical journal after medical journal. Everything he found, he wrote, and he taught openly with his writings of stuff. So he educated the West on hypnosis at this time where it's starting to transition into this suggestive therapeutics work. And he was a doctor, so he held a lot of credibility, and he was keeping it separate from the woo-woo stuff. And he was drawing this line saying it's is not witchcraft. Some of this other stuff is witchcraft, but this is medical. And that was huge, and that was influential. The term hypnosis had come from a French guy who did it years before, and he did the equivalent of what happened in the 90s, where people bought up like web domains so that like Coke would have to pay them $1 million to be able to have Coke.com. He did that. Every terminology that could be used for this thing in the future, he's listed in a book so that he'd be credited one day in the future.
I think with the other thing with Braid is there's a couple of like evolutionary steps. And so you can kind of think of what Mesmer does is he pulls the rock out of the earth, and then Poisson comes along and is like, oh, there's something else in this person. So we're starting to get to that idea of the unconscious. And Braid's big contribution is fixation. That idea of like staring at a candle flame and going into trance that way. I think Braid, I don't know if he was like, he didn't really develop it, but he was the one that really kind of clarified that role. And what you see, I mean, like, I correct me if I'm wrong here, Lance, but I think like Mesmer's stuff like took like a long time. Like you sat around this baquette until it kicks in, and then continuing, I mean, on into the 20th century, there was a lot of things where it's like the induction takes hours and hours and hours and hours, and Braid was like, oh, you can have someone like stare at a candle flame. You're still having them stare at the candle flame for like an hour, but like we're starting to get a little bit faster.
For sure.
So the other one that I just wanted to bring up, because I think this is fascinating, around the same time, there's a guy named Esdale. Esdale is super problematic because he is very, British colonialist in India, like views that are not acceptable. But he was managing a hospital, and I just want to read this one quick thing because it's fascinating. So in 1845, Esdale was responsible for the Hooghly Hospital near Calcutta. and he found himself dealing with a painful problem endemic to the region. Due to filariasis transmitted by mosquitoes, many men suffered from hydrolicles of the scrotum, tumors which grew enormous as bodily fluids accumulated in the scrotal sac. The operation to deal with this condition was so painful that patients put it off for years and years, so that Esdale was faced with many severely enlarged tumors, one weighing as much as 103 pounds, which was more or less the natural body weight of the patient as well. And so he was a meticulous recorder of his work. He was documenting this, and he was using hypnosis to do these operations. And people later were like, oh, I think they were just, going along with it because you were telling them to. He's like, what man is going to let you remove 100-pound tumor from their scrotum because they are just going along with it? And so in terms of the power of hypnosis for anesthesia, I mean, he performed thousands of these operations that were not really doable. And hypnosis was such an effective anesthesia, but it, again, doesn't fit into the materialist paradigm, and you have to be trained in how to do it well. So when chloroform came along, people switched over to chloroform, even though the mortality rate on chloroform and ether in the early days was absurd. And so one contemporary fact about hypnosis that's interesting is that for things like colonoscopies, people are starting to return to hypnosis because it sucks going under. Like, anesthesia is not fun. Even if it's less dangerous, it's still not risk-free. And so more and more people are starting to re-examine medical hypnosis. But
crazy.
Fuck Esdale, but also
Esdale also, he wasn't doing hypnosis, he was doing mesmerism. And yes, if you want a book that you read that makes you vomit in your mouth continually, Mesmerism in India by James Esdale, because he writes very, very detailed things of those kind of operations. But a very important thing of one of his statements is, while he was in India, he found it worked so much easier when he returned back to Europe and he's in Scotland. He said it took 10 times as long to get the Scottish people into that same state because of that conditioning that was around in India. People were used to trance. That was part of life. So it was easier to get them into that state. But he, because he was busy doing his things, he had people getting people ready for it. So he'd be having assistants that would do the mesmerism for him quite often, and he'd do the final bit to get him right into that state in the moment to do that.
Like
stuff.
The dentist, when the hygienist has already cleaned out your teeth, and the dentist comes in and is like, all right, here's 2 things. All right, you're good.
Yeah, exactly like that. But I found that very interesting, of his thing of that cultural thing that Devin had mentioned earlier, off the cuff, of that difference there. That yes, he noticed that difference greatly. And I have noticed with mesmerism, the first time I work with somebody, it takes ages for the average person. After I've worked with them a few times, it can be a lot quicker. But
yeah,
there's
I feel bad for this guy for going to Scotland, because the Scottish, they're stubborn people at the best of times, right? He says with Scottish ancestors. What is? Oh my gosh, that's amazing, guys. That's wonderful. We don't have time to get into every single name. I believe
I was going to say we might want to jump ahead.
Yeah, there's Pierre Janet as well. You have Sigmund Freud as well, Emile Coué. But something that you brought up, Devin, was something called the Nancy School. What is this?
So the Nancy School was a hospital in France where they were starting to develop hypnosis. And unfortunately, I love reading history books, and then I don't remember any of the information. So I'm the person, I'm like, oh yeah, that was this name, but which one was that? And so, the Nancy School was one where it kind of that's one of those links that brings it more forward towards modernity. But I will just say that Coué is really influential, because that is where, again, I think you see these moments where new ideas come in, and that's where suggestion sort of really burst onto the scene. So we're like, okay, there's something here with mesmerism. There's some kind of unconscious other self that we're discovering. Now we realize there's something about fixation. And then with fixation, there's this idea of suggestion or autosuggestion. Coué is famous for the phrase, I'm getting better every day and every way I'm getting better and better.
Yeah.
And that, leads to new thought in America and all of the stuff that Mitch Horowitz has chronicled so well. And I think that's a pretty big leap forward. And that, I think, gets us to hypnosis in the 20th century, where we're calling it hypnosis. There's more talking involved, and there's various fixation techniques. And I'll just address it here. The swinging watch, the iconic swinging watch,
Right.
is wonderful. It's not in fashion anymore, but we used it for a reason. It's not just nonsense and superstition. And it's one of these things that it's kind of almost like a little bit of a magic trick that makes hypnosis works. Because basically, the more that I give you experiences that you go, whoa, something's happening, the more that creates that belief that helps you go into trance. And so if somebody's sitting and their face is forward and you're swinging a watch slightly above eye level, their eyes are tilted upward to track the watch. And that is not a normal position for the eyes to be in. That causes strain. Also, the swinging back and forth is causing that rapid eye movement, which we also experience in dreaming. So if I put you in a position where you're trying to look at something and your eyes are straining, and then I say, your eyes are going to feel really tired. You're really going to want to close your eyes. Yeah. Same way if I had you extend your arm and put a big bag of rocks in it, and it was like, your arm's going to feel really tired. You're like, whoa, it does. So the swinging watch is iconic, but also, had a real purpose to it.
We wouldn't have the self-help movement today if it wasn't for Emil QA. That was the first best-selling self-help book ever, the auto-suggestion one. The names you're trying to think of is Lebeau and Bernheim. Hippolyte Bernheim, he had two of his books that were translated by Freud. First two writings Freud did was translations of Bernheim's work. So he was deep into hypnosis, Freud. He studied with them at another school. The pocket watch thing is like, it was just a handy thing they had. Like everybody had a pocket watch for a shiny thing, because Braid worked with the eye fixation on something reflective and shiny quite often. But the movement of the pocket watch, that didn't come till a fair bit later. That came from pendulum use of ideomotor things, that they'd have somebody holding the pendulum and get them to stare at it. And that movement would happen from there, and they'd be going into trance while this ideomotor stuff is happening. And that's where the movement of it started to come into popular culture, and the misconception of outsiders seeing things of, the pocket watch was moving, that was involved. So movies come out where, look at the watch, the watch. And it's embedded so much into everybody's minds that we now use it. Some people use it. I don't use the pocket watch induction, but it's become an easy bit, because it was once go, yes, if the pocket watch is moving, I'm going to go into trance. And we've later noticed all these extra things of the eye movement. I just find it fascinating how things evolve and change, and we have no idea of what's going on in the background with it.
I had a psychologist for a little while, and he used the eraser of a pencil. He just had the pencil in his hand, and just like Devin described it, he held it a little bit further up in my vision and just back and forth. And he said, you're probably going to want to close your eyes. I'm like, you bet I do. And there you go. Two terms that we've used quite a bit without giving it a proper definition and explaining it a little bit are suggestion and autosuggestion. So what are these things?
Auto means self.
Auto means self. And then suggestion is, for your magical audience, this is kind of like the statement of intent when you're making a sigil. But a suggestion is pretty straightforward. It's a suggestion. Like, I can suggest to you, Doug, that you're going to think about your feet and be more aware of the feelings of your feet. And I can phrase that suggestion in different ways to make it more effective. For example, I could wonder if your toes feel cold or hot right now. And so I'm suggesting to you to think about your toes, which is causing you to think about your toes more. But instead of just saying, Doug, I'd like you to think about your toes, I'm embedding that suggestion into a question of, now, have you noticed, Doug, if your toes feel a little bit hot or a little bit cold? And when you wiggle them, which toe do you notice wiggling the most? My suggestion within all of that is think about your toes, but I'm phrasing those as questions in various ways. So in hypnotherapy, you're both using suggestion from the most basic of, and I'd like you to close your eyes. That's a suggestion. It can be a command, but it's also kind of a suggestion. And then you can do the more classic, like authoritarian, where, and from this day forward, you will never want a cigarette again. Anytime you think about a cigarette, you'll feel sick to your stomach and you'll hate cigarettes and blah, blah, blah. But there's also the more indirect suggestion where you're linking those ideas and you're using vague language, and there's words that you kind of highlight, like, with the smoking client, I could be, when they're in trance in this kind of sing-songy voice, say, now everybody either gets sick of smoking or sick from smoking. So I don't know whether you'll reach a point where you get sick from smoking, and you can imagine how that will feel to be in the doctor's office and getting that cancer diagnosis, and the fear that you'll fear in that moment. Or if you'll get sick of smoking right now and decide that you are tired of this habit, you don't want it anymore, and that thought of smoking just makes you sick to your stomach because you want to move forward and be a non-smoker. So within all of that is a bunch of language that's making the direction clear, but kind of mixed in with that wordplay, which is a helpful way to get the conscious mind to not have that knee-jerk, I'm not going to do what you tell me reaction, which is very common these days.
Right. Lance, what is induction?
Induction is the process where you're inducing somebody into hypnosis, where you're guiding them there. You're doing hypnosis with somebody or on somebody. You're connecting them into that trance state. And induction, yes, it pretty much, most people would say that's the bit that leads to trance, but you can, I'd also say an induction can be something that doesn't include trance, but still leads to a way that you can have that communication with the deeper part as well outside of trance. But induction, yeah, the process of getting them to the place you want them to be to do what you want to do in a hypnotic framework.
So when we were talking about the watch and my psychologist with the pencil, that is...
pencil thing, that is an induction. When a stage hypnotist comes up and grabs somebody's shoulder and shakes their hand and says, they is doing an induction. It's just a very, very rapid one. Some people use really long, slow, drawn out things as their induction of describing guided meditations into things, or the progressive muscle relaxations. I like to use ideomotor inductions, where I get the subconscious to start giving them a phenomena to begin with, that people are like, wow, something is happening, and then add suggestions to make their eyes close along the way with that the subconscious is making it happen internally as it goes.
One thing that I'd love to add, and this is something that I think about both in my wizardry and in my hypnosis practice, is the power of story. And I think all the way back to Mesmer, animal magnetism was a story. Have you heard about this guy Mesmer? Oh my God, I heard that Kathy fainted and now her gout's gone. Like, wow, that's so amazing. So people go already with the story of, I'm going to see this person, I'm going to have this cathartic crisis, and then I'm going to be healed on the other side. And that's the story they're having. I think in a condensed form, the induction is the story of how I take somebody coming in and going, I've never been hypnotized before. I'm not sure if it's real, and I'm also kind of afraid of it. And I'm saying, let me tell you a story about how hypnosis works. And by listening to the words that I'm saying, you can go from the way that you feel right now into an experience that can feel all of these different ways, but it doesn't have to. So you can tell your own story about what you're experiencing, but by creating this feeling where you're now like, whoa, I feel like I'm in this kind of drifty, dreamy thing, I'm going to tell you a story about how once upon a time you were eating too much, and then you decided to make a change and come to a hypnotherapist. That hypnotherapist harnessed the power of your unconscious mind, which now is going to help you not eat all of that sugar and junk that you were eating. And then from this day forward, you can go forward having made this change and feel so much better. And when someone really wants to buy into that story, I've given them the whole framework for that life change to hang on, the same way that somebody else could accidentally be like, oh, I was drinking and then I got in a car accident and I had this moment of clarity, like waiting for the paramedic to cut me out of the car, where I was like, I can't do this anymore. And that's the story that they tell in AA. And that's the story that serves as the foundation of their sobriety. So the induction is fascinating because there's a million different kinds. There's endless amounts of ways that you can hypnotize somebody. But I think a couple of the key categories to think about are, one, people who are not experienced with hypnosis, not sure about it, that are coming for a therapeutic version. That's what like Lance and I see as clients. Stage hypnosis, people are coming out for a fun time, and then the stage hypnotist helps them tell the story of letting go and being fun. And so we can talk about stage hypnosis more if you want, but like the basic idea is, think about the coworker who's shy, but when you get them out to karaoke and they have a drink or two, suddenly they're up there singing Total Eclipse of the Heart. It's not that they're like so wasted. It's that little bit of alcohol lets them go, oh my God, I had a drink and now I can loosen up and let out this other side. So in stage hypnosis, you give people a framework where they can be performative and funny in ways that they would feel awkward about, because they have that excuse of, I'm hypnotized. And then at any place where people are playing around with hypnosis, people who like hypnosis, there's a erotic hypnosis scene, things like that. When you already want to be hypnotized and you know how to go into trance, it's basically just whatever signal you want to give to somebody. So that's where you could say, hey, look at the shiny coin. Look, it's so cool. And now you're in trance and they want to go. So there's no resistance. There's no needing to like explain it. They're just like, you said trance and I'm there. Let's go.
Amazing. Let's talk about, perhaps for my money, one of the most interesting characters that I've come across in the last 3 years, by the name of Milton Erickson. So I'm sure that both of you guys have a lot to say about Milton Erickson, but who is he and why is he such an important figure?
You want to take this, Lance, or you want me to go first?
I want you to, because you just did an Ericksonian thing there with what you said. You showed Ericksonian hypnosis in play. So I'd like you to explain him.
Yeah, I'm very Ericksonian influenced because the place that I was listening to hypnosis tapes for a long time was that. And I just absorbed a lot of that language and thinking. So Milton Erickson was a psychologist. His like Superman origin story was when he was a kid, he had polio and he was supposed to like die. Like he overheard the doctor being like, this kid's going to be dead by dawn. And he like stared at like, I think like the blind where the sun would come up. He's like, I'm going to see that motherfucking sun. And like, come at me,
That's a different term than I remember him saying, but
yeah. And then he was paralyzed. And so he observed everyone and he started to realize, oh, my sister's like telling my mom, yes, I'd love to help with that. And her body's saying the exact opposite. And he started to read those kinds of things in people. And then as he develops his therapy, he's interested in hypnosis. And he's the one who really starts with a couple of like foundational principles that I think are just beautiful, whether you're into hypnosis or not. I think these are so great. One is the idea that everyone is unique. So when somebody comes in, I don't do hypnosis script A. I do what works for them. And my job is to learn what works for them, which leads to point number 2. There is no failure. There is only feedback. So if what I'm doing isn't working and my clients is like giggling and laughing and like, I can't focus, that doesn't mean I need to scold them and say, you're doing it wrong. That means they're giving me information that I need to try other things and learn why are they having this reaction. And that is just, I mean, that is worth the price of admission alone. Like that is so valuable in basically every area of life. And then he also thought that people already had the resources to solve their problems. So somebody comes in and says, I just procrastinate all the time. I have no motivation. And it's like, well, what do you like doing? Like, you know, like if you didn't have to go to work, what would you do? And, you know, they list all of these things that they love doing. And it's like, do you do those things? Yeah. Well, you're motivated to do those things. So you have motivation. It's just not connected to the boring chore. So how do we connect those things? You know, somebody who doesn't feel confident, you don't feel confident in certain situations. Where's the time that you feel confident? If you were teaching somebody how to sew, you're an expert sewer. Like, you would be very confident about that. So he had a variety of approaches, but the main one is this idea of conversational hypnosis. So instead of the authoritarian model where it says, you are getting sleepy, you are going into trance, you are listening to my voice and going deeper, 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 and their commands, he had these like rambling musings.
Yeah.
And he would bore people into trance. He would tell them a long story within a story. So, your problem reminds me of a client. And when that client came in, they didn't know if hypnosis was real either. But as they were sitting in that chair, just like you're sitting in that chair right now, and they were feeling the way that their body naturally sinks into that chair, they started to notice feelings of being heavy. You could imagine how that would feel for them. And so I'm talking about somebody else, which lets you off the hook of trying to have that experience. If I say, Doug, you're feeling very heavy right now, and you go, no, I'm not. It's wrong. But if I'm saying, you can imagine the story I'm telling you, and you start to feel those feelings, and there's all of these wonderful language patterns that you can use. It can get a little mushy. There are things that I think are very wonderful about also having more direct commands in your toolkit and being able to work with other things, especially depending on the kind of trance you want. But that was Erickson. And now there are so many Ericksonians. There's kind of a hagiographic aura about him and all of these things. The one thing that I'll say is so interesting, though, that I brought up earlier is times change. Cultural context is so important. And when I read Erickson's books and he's talking about all of these like amazing, healings that he did and things, they're for conditions that like I just don't encounter in the modern world. Like, he has so many patients with like hysterical paralysis where suddenly they're like, my like right arm doesn't work anymore. And he had this fun trick where he would move the symptom to a different limb. So you come in and you're like, it's a medical condition. My arm is paralyzed. There's something medically wrong with me. And he would move the paralysis to their other arm. And the person's like, well, damn it, I'm still paralyzed in one arm, but now it's so obvious that it's in my mind. And that helps them in the next session break that lock. But it's so fascinating. Like, I don't know how often you see clients that have hysterical paralysis, Lance, but it hasn't really popped up for me very often.
No, not too often. No. Yeah. The interesting thing I find about Erickson is that individuality that you talked about. I know a few people that studied with him directly that were mentored by him, and their understanding of hypnosis is different from each other, and their understanding of what he was teaching was different from each other. And there's like people that were in the same room at the same time learning off him, that their understanding was different. He didn't teach a paint by numbers framework at all. It was everybody's got their story. It's why I messaged you the other day, Doug, to try and find that quote of Grant Morrison's of like, everything is story. Like, everything has narrative if it's important, and everything important has narrative. That everybody's got a story linked with something. And he would talk in abstract ways about things, get them to think about it outside of what their situation was. And so you can see another key figure in cultural history that used to do that. What did the main cult of the world, Christianity, follow? This guy called Jesus, who told parables where he would try and get his lesson through in a different story to make them think about it as they walked away and remember what the key bit was. It's an amazing tool, but it's not something that you can go, well, this is what you say and what you do with this person, and this is what you say and do with this condition. It's listen to the goddamn person sitting across from you and try and get what they're not getting and say it to them a different way. Or he's a guy that was a fantastic psychologist. And he used
communicator,
hypnosis.
I think.
Yes,
I think just like an unparalleled communicator. And if I could just hop in and share like one other detail that I think is so crucial, just real quick as an exercise, and everyone at home can do this. Think of a door. Like you can close your eyes if it's safe and you're not driving a car, but just like think of a door and how you would open that door and the material it's made of. And just like really think about the weight of the door as you open it and step through. Now, I'm just doing a quick version here, but everything I said leaves that door open to interpretation. So what was the door that you thought of, Doug?
There was a red door.
Like
yeah.
Red door. Yeah. Great.
Giant
What kind of handle did it have?
It had a round handle, round bronze handle.
Round bronze handle. Great. Mm-hmm. Now, if I was trying to guide somebody and I said, think of a door. Now you can reach out and pull the black bar that opens it or like whatever thing. I've just broken the door that you created.
Yeah.
When I talk about like the old splintery wood, you're like, oh, my door was like red and metal. Like I've broken your door. So when you use this artfully vague language, you let people create this picture in their mind that is so vivid and real and avoid having to erase and rewrite things, which like, degrades the quality. And then what's amazing is people will later be like, dude, that was so crazy. Like when you described that red door, I could really see that brass handle. I never said red. I never said brass. That was all in your mind, but people will really give you credit for those things because it's so vivid for them.
Love it.
Mine had a straight handle that you knocked down.
There you go. Yeah.
Lance, I got to ask you this one because I don't know if you've done any of this. Perhaps you have, but for most people, they will be familiar with hypnosis in some way as entertainment. They will have gone to a bar where there was a stage hypnotist and one of their friends clucks like a chicken or is afraid when somebody comes up with a red shirt or such things. What do you make of hypnosis as entertainment? And does it have some kind of thing to teach each and every one of us?
Yes, I think it does. I've never made somebody cluck like a chicken, and never will, because I like to. That's one of the main things people say of, have you made somebody cluck like a chicken? And I like to say no. So I'm never going to do that one. I'll make them bark like a dog. I went and studied with Justin Trans, who I think is the world's best current living stage hypnotist. I did a lot of research first to see who does a lot, what sort of way they work. And so I spent days and days with him learning back to front what he does. I had the intention of doing a stage show, or just one-off. I was going to go to some random little Aussie town where nobody knew me and do a stage show just to experience it. And I haven't, because right after I did it, it wasn't too long after I studied with him that this pandemic thing started. Mm-hmm. It changed my trajectory of where I focused rather than on groups. But I mostly went to, because I was curious. I was like, well, I can't do that sort of stuff. I'm curious about it. But while I was there, I learned heaps that have been integrated into my actual therapy. Like we spent a day where Justin went through his stage show. Like he's got an hour set and he went through it and he played it on a projector, pause. So what I just did here was this blah, 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 blah. I talk about it. Watch this girl over here. I'm about to do something with her and watch the steps I take and play for a couple of seconds, pause. And so see, I said that to her and watch what's going to happen later, blah, blah, blah. We spent a day going through this hour thing where he explained every little thing of what's going on. And so a stage show, it looks really miraculous and quick, but they're setting up earlier. They're doing different things. The only time I've been involved with a stage show was I went as a guest to watch, didn't know the guy, I'd heard of him. A friend had invited me who used to be his stagehand, and there was another guy who was a stage hypnotist there, and I was sitting having some drinks with them. I'm a very poor subject with hypnosis. And the girl who was the stagehand from the moment I got there, she's like, you're going to get up on stage today. And I'm like, I'm not that kind of like suggestible person, so it's not going to work. And she goes, it is going to today. I know that. And she primed me for like an hour or so while we're having drinks before the show. She's dropping little prompts, priming. And then he did his tests with everybody to work out who was the bell ends that we're going to get up on stage by locking our hands together, which partly is a trick because your hands do lock together if you hold them tight enough for long enough without suggestions. And I knew that was a trick, but I noticed they were actually stuck on a suggestibility level. And I'm like, wow, it's worked. This trick has never worked for me before. I've had heaps of people do this to me, and every other time I've been able to do that. And I didn't. And I looked at the girl who'd been priming me and said, fuck you. I had to get up on stage because I was excited about it. And he did these things of getting deeper and deeper, and I could feel the suggestions working, but I was also going with that. And I knew like he actually stuffed up. He said a suggestion wrong. And I knew in my mind, like, he hasn't told me that I'm safe and I'm not going to fall off the floor. And the way he's described it is I'm going to fall out of this chair because he hasn't paid attention to language and he isn't watching what I'm doing. He's focused on somebody 3 chairs over. Right. And I knew I was going to fall off. And I thought, well, I could snap out of this now and brace myself, but I'm going with the experience. And I just watched his suggestions. Every time he did and said this different thing, I felt my body jolt forward this little bit until I dropped out of the front of the chair. And I'm right. I was, because I think my hands were still locked together. Like that braced my fall anyway. And it wasn't like I was going to fall off the stage. I knew there was a bit there. And I'm like wowing myself inside going, this is a real stage hypnosis experience. But then he got us up to do things, and I like had to put on this tutu and do stuff. And I'm like, I'm not in trance now. Now I'm complying so I don't make this guy look like an idiot in front of all these people, because he's now like, I didn't know him. I knew I was going to be introduced to him afterwards, but I'm like, either way, he's a colleague. I don't want to be like that jerk that's ruined his thing that he's going to interact with in some way throughout the rest of his career. And the boy next to me, I could tell he was playing along. The girl next to me, I could tell she was in trance. She had nothing of compliance there. She was just in the suggestion. And as soon as I got the opportunity, I like snuck off and disappeared off stage because I didn't want to pretend and I didn't want to make him look bad. So I just took my sneaky little exit. But from that day of going through the stuff with Justin, it helped me to see everything that in I think we spent 7 or 8 days together. It was 6 days of training, but we spent extra time outside that, doing his processes and learning his things. I could see all these things that since then, a lot of little bits have snuck in therapeutically that have been inspired by the stage show. And the other beautiful benefit of stage hypnosis is, although heaps of people hate the way it advertises hypnosis, it's the best advertisement for hypnosis out there. Like that's what's kept it in the popular culture mind for people to know, well, if it can make people do that, maybe it can make me drop this anxiety. Maybe it can make me drop this habit and addiction. Maybe it can help me not be scared of something. So it's incredibly potent in that regard.
That's super well said, Lance. And I want to just like highlight a couple of things. So first, Lance brought up the idea of priming. And you can think of priming as you're going to a dinner party and your friend's like, ugh, their friend Becky's going to be there. She is the worst. You haven't met Becky, but you are much more likely to now have a negative experience of Becky because of that. The same, like they do this in psychology where they'll have people do basically like a word search. And if they put in a bunch of words, like, you know, related to God, faith, Jesus, and they're doing it with Christians, then those people will be like more giving in the test that they give them because they're primed to think in that certain way. So whether you're doing it in the office or on the street for a YouTube video or in stage, before you start giving suggestions, you're giving suggestions. You're describing what's going to happen. You're telling the story of how it's going to be. You're saying, now, you've never been in trance before. Now, here's how trance will feel like. And then you're giving them all of those expectations. So that's a big part of it. And then there's also that expectation of performance in a crowd. And if you're a good stage hypnotist, like you'll get some people that are playing along, but what you want is it's so much easier to go along and play the game than it would be to stand on stage and be a party pooper and go, no, it's not working for me. And everyone's like, okay, that was lame. Like, get them off the stage, go on to the next person. So there's that expectancy. And just like Lance was saying, originally this was demonstrations because, hey, mesmerism, here's a thing, come to my hour, or like, you know, 1800s, my 7-hour long lecture, blah, blah, blah. You have nothing better to do.
Right.
And they would do these demonstrations. And when science was saying, no, that hypnosis stuff, there was countless people that were making their living doing demonstrations and traveling around and really keeping it alive.
Yes.
And I think there's a funny spectrum of respectability. So you have the medical hypnotists, and there's organizations that are only for, you know, psychologists, PsyDs, PhDs. Like, you have to be a doctor to be in our club, and we are the academics, and we are the real hypnotists, and no one else should do it except for us. And then you have the consulting hypnotists who help people quit smoking and that. And it's regulation varies, but in the United States, there's no like bar association. There's no single governing body. And so anyone can do it, which means that there's plenty of people that are kind of hokey or not as good. And there's a lot of people that want to be respectable. We want to be in the cooler club. So we're very serious about this. And they sort of sometimes look down, not always, on the stage hypnotists, because the stage hypnotists can be incredible performers, or it can be like a really hokey, bad magic show where all of the patter feels canned and it's just a little bit cringy. But the stage hypnotists do a very different form of hypnosis, because in therapeutic hypnosis, it's mostly internal. It's in your mind. And especially if I'm doing Ericksonian conversational hypnosis, I could just drone at you for an hour and be like, yeah, you were hypnotized. And I'm never testing it. Right. Whereas stage hypnosis, we're doing the cool human tricks where your hand is numb or you see something that's not there. All of the most wild, interesting phenomenon in hypnosis is primarily being explored on the stage, except for the group that's even further out, which is the erotic hypnosis community, which splits into two ways. There's like the online version, which is like weird, like sissification videos that you'd see on Pornhub, where it's like a spiral and it's like, you're a naughty little girl, you. But then
that's where I know your voice from, Devin.
But one of my first exposures was going to an erotic hypnosis conference, and it's part of the larger kink community. So everyone's very queer friendly, very consent based, and they're like, no one's going to respect us because we're doing this for weird, horny reasons. So they're pioneering the craziest stuff. They're like, oh, I have an alien vivisection fantasy. How can we train my mind to really think that I'm like an alien that's being cut open? And they, I think, are like, have the most overlap with occult uses, because they're just doing this and exploring it. And it's not somebody who came to see a show or a patient who's paying money to create a change. It's somebody who was actively a participant and saying, let's work together. And if I'm not good at hypnotic amnesia, because different skills work for different people, let's train my mind to forget things. Let's like help me work on that. And so I think those are the pioneers that are doing some of the coolest stuff in the game right now.
Very cool.
There was one more bit where twice stage hypnosis actually drastically added to the credibility of hypnosis. So once, the guy we talked about earlier, Braid, how he came to be involved in the hypnosis world was he went to a stage mesmerism show by Charles Lafontaine to discredit it. Okay. And he walked away going, oh,
there's something
shit,
here,
that's real. And that sparked his like rest of his life's passion. So without the stage mesmerist scene, we wouldn't have had him and all the contributions he had. And as Devin was talking about there with the medical community, the medical community's reintroduction to the hypnosis scene, because it had died out, doctors had to sign a thing to say they would not do mesmerism or hypnosis, or they would lose their license. At one stage, there was a guy who set up a mesmeric hospital when that happened, and just did his own thing rather than being a doctor because of that. But so it had left the medical world, and some were doing it, but the ones that were doing it when they were starting to reintroduce it were learning off Erickson sort of thing, and it was slow, and it was too hard to do that really quick in a office situation where you've got 6 minutes to see somebody. It's pretty hard to do a good Ericksonian thing because you can't analyze the person enough to know what sort of suggestions are going to work well. A lot of the slower trance induction based processes, it's just like too hard. Forget about it. I'll just give them a script. So a guy called Dave Ellman, he was a really young stage hypnotist back in the day. He worked on vaudeville doing, that's it, Hypnotherapy, the Green Book.
The Green Book.
He had this career doing stage hypnosis, and he left it. Vaudeville like appeared. He got into radio and was doing like just this like radio variety show. Had a stage hypnotist on as one of his shows. The stage hypnotist bombed, so Dave just jumped right in, did his old routine from when he was a kid, saved the day. His wife at the time had no idea that he knew hypnosis, and she's like, so Dave, how come you can do hypnosis better than the professional hypnotist? What's up with that? And he had to explain his backstory. But from that, a doctor was in the audience, and he started to hassle Dave of like, we want you to teach us that. And he talked with his other doctors about this thing he'd just seen. And so they started adding to him, and they were harassing Dave like, you've got to teach us. We want to know how to do it quick like you. Because he had what he called the 3-minute routine, which now gets called the Dave Ellman induction. And the process is loosely based on Bernheim's work, that Nancy school guy of putting people in and out of trance really quick, essentially, to get them deeper each and every time. But eventually they convinced him to do it. And he spent a huge chunk of his life just traveling around America, teaching doctors and dentists hypnosis and quick stage sort of stuff that they could use in their 6-minute consultations with people. And so that created this massive boom in America of hypnosis in a credible sense that gave it an extra chance that we can be here to talk about it today. Because of that introduction to culture in the credible medical world.
Love it. I don't know if you gentlemen have read one of my favorite trilogies of books is called Sinister Forces by Peter Levenda. He basically talks about conspiracy, all of that great stuff in America. MK Ultra is brought up. No doubt you gentlemen have both heard of that. But if you go through Sinister Forces, hypnosis is brought up countless times in those 3 books, as it was being used by the CIA. To what effect, we don't really know, because they burned a lot of their research. But what do you two have to say about how hypnosis has been used for nefarious, if not downright, I don't want to say evil, but in strange and gross ways? Do any of you have anything to say about hypnosis being used for these kinds of things?
Well, I don't live in America, so CIA is not going to get me.
Oh, yeah. Borders. Yeah, that really, the CIA is like, darn it. They're in their own sovereign nation.
We've never done anything in Australia.
They just stand at the Mexican border and stomp on their hat and go, oh, no, they got away.
Governments want control. You'd have to be a pretty freaking stupid government not to explore hypnosis. With everything we just talked about, why would you not be curious about trying that? I am surprised more governments are not investing more money into that to explore it. I know governments couldn't be trusted well with it because, well, they want more control than they should have. And in that military concept as well, like in the MK Ultra processes, they were using it to try and create the super soldier and the spy who would never give up, and the spy who would have no idea that they can find a way to drop a signal to them, that as soon as you pick up a phone and hear this certain noise, you're going to switch and you're going to be the assassin. And there's no way that the enemy is going to pick up on them if they're actually just a tourist there and have no link to the government. So they get this call, and then all of a sudden they are the trained assassin. They can do the thing, and then the government's got no loss. It's just this crazy person. It's got nothing to do with us because they've done something, left the suggestion that at the end of that, you'll revert back to yourself and you won't know. There's writings of a guy who says he worked for the MK Ultra process, George Estabrooks. It's been proven that he did not. His book says he did, really? But there's a letter he actually wrote to Erickson postulating, would these sort of things be able to be done? I think they could, and letters he's wrote to the CIA saying I could do these things with you guys if you'd let me join. So it seems like he didn't actually do it the way he says he's done it, but his processes were like, yes, he hypnotized this secretary for a military official, and she had a reverse hallucination that she could not see a gun in her drawer, and when he called her and said this keyword, she would switch into the assassin. She would open that drawer and the negative hallucination would have disappeared, and she'd see the gun, and she picked the gun up and she walked into the boss's office, shot him. It was a blank. And then would walk out, drop it in the waste bin on her way out. As soon as she shut the door, she forgets that that's ever happened, and she's just told him that his wife was online too and has gone back to her desk and works as normal. So a story like that would put any good CIA official going, yes, let's put some money into this. Let's do some experiments with that. I think there would have been a lot of that happening that, yeah, we're not going to find out about. And I dare say 99% of it would be highly unethical. But I had thought of approaching the military myself before because of a way of training soldiers to be just better soldiers, not doing anything nefarious, just like teaching their brain to
being a better
hit the target that they want.
Nefarious.
It is, but they're already doing that. But if they're gonna shoot, they might as well hit the target, or to have the resilience to be able to do the thing. I didn't send the letter off because of that still ethical dilemma, but I thought, well, that would be a way that I could feel ethically somewhat comfortable with it. But the other huge thing would be to like remove that trauma. Like I have worked with the police force and have helped police release trauma with that sort of stuff of what they're exposed to daily. And so I would say as well, CIA and other government official places would have put some money into it for that bit of saving their back end of, well, we won't have to pay millions of dollars in compo claims to these people if we've done hypnotherapy with them. So let's explore that.
So with anything occult, woo-woo, psychic, mind-based, there's something there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a professional wizard. Otherwise, I don't think you'd have this podcast. There's something there. Yeah. We're not chasing our own tails, but what's there is not clear or consistent in any way. We do not have, banks aren't like, we have our precog department that's just getting psychic dreams, and that's how we play the stock market. Like, that's not the way that our world works because this stuff is not reliable. So while I think people explored a lot of that, and there's like plenty of weird stuff that comes up, it's not effective enough in that way to be reliable and reproducible and used. A couple of interesting points on this, though. Saran, who I think is the one that shot Bobby Kennedy, claimed that he was hypnotized into doing it. Darren Brown has a special where it's all about this idea of, can you hypnotize somebody to do it? And they basically have a huge pool of people. They find a very hypnotizable subject. They work with him for months and set up this thing where he does try and assassinate Stephen Fry in this staged setting. But Darren Brown will loudly be the first one to tell you that what he produces is entertainment. That's a reality TV show. So, like, again, we don't live in a world where everyone's just ordering a hypnotized assassin off DoorDash to get rid of their enemies.
Right.
But I think what's important to remember is that there are principles within hypnosis that exist outside of hypnosis. Hypnosis is a condensed version where we're talking about these things in a consensual way. Those same dynamics can be used unconsensually. Same like you can have a consenting power dynamic in a BDSM relationship, or you can be in an abusive relationship. So the way that I can use suggestion to help someone change for good, somebody else can use suggestion to reinforce the idea that you're not worth anything. And if you leave me, no one will ever love you. Or you aren't happy and you would be happier if you had the product or service that I'm trying to sell you, and all of that. And Scott Adams, the guy that drew the Dilbert cartoon, who is pretty big piece of shit at this point, like pretty great example of like, don't overestimate your own intelligence. You'll look like an ass. And he looks like an ass very, very much. And he's gotten very right. But when Trump was first running in the primaries, he wrote an article on his blog about Trump being a wizard. And Scott Adams had studied Ericksonian hypnosis and is one of these guys that is like, I'm a master pickup artist because I learned NLP. And it's like, yeah, probably because you're a really rich dude that created Dilbert. Some people get that Dilbert dick, like it's worth a story. But Trump's language is quite hypnotic. That's where you saw this really interesting thing where people are like, he's not even finishing his sentences. And it's like, yeah, because it's not about weird diction and like logical arguments. It's about emotion. And so much of it is almost an Ericksonian language pattern where he will say like, I am the best, but he's like, a lot of people out there saying I'm the best president there ever was. I don't know. That's what they're saying, not me. And it's like,
right.
There's a lot of that. And so in the 70s, people got concerned about subliminal messages in advertising. They passed a law saying you couldn't, write sex in an ice cube to try and do it. But we still use that power of suggestion of, hey, this guy is a dork that looks like you. But as soon as he cracks open that Bud Light, wow, partying with babes. Right. And that is a suggestion in the same way that telling someone a story about, if you do this thing differently, you will feel better and get over your trauma as a story. So.
Yeah. I find this stuff very interesting. I'm not going to get into that. I could start a whole other podcast about these kind of things being used in conspiratorial kinds of ways. But there's people who have been hypnotized and robbed banks. Like I'm not talking about like Patty Hearst and kind of things, although she was in some way somewhat traumatized and hypnotized. But people being hypnotized to do strange things. And
can I make one? So
absolutely.
One of my favorite examples of this, if anyone's ever seen the movie The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo,
yes,
there's a scene at the end where Daniel Craig has figured out who the murderer is, and he's like snooping around trying to get some evidence, and then he's like trying to leave through the backyard, and the guy like turns on the porch lights. He's like, hey, what are you doing out there? Come in for a drink. And he comes in for a drink, and then the drink is like dosed, and he wakes up in the killer's torture basement, and the killer's got him tied him up. He's like, you already knew it was me. But the idea of violating my offer was more awkward and uncomfortable, that you put yourself in harm's way rather than be like, no, thanks, don't want to drink. Good night. I'm gonna book. So this is where ideas about consent get very blurry, because violating someone's consent isn't just I held you down and forced you to do something. It can be there was a situation that created unconscious social pressure where someone, they never did anything or said anything that was like objectively fucked up, but then the whole situation is, when you look at it, you're like, oh, that was clearly pressure there. Yeah.
That's craziness. Yeah, no, that's very, very well put. So murky waters, let's head into some more murky waters, or maybe even just some fun waters. Nevertheless, Lance, I know you've probably got a lot of these because you've told me a couple of them and they are pretty wild, but from what you can share, both of you, what is your weirdest, coolest, strangest story that you have involving hypnosis?
Life gets very, very weird when you do hypnosis.
Yeah.
For a while. I know a few hypnotists that are not spiritual at all, and I find it really hard to understand how you can do this long term and not be exposed to very deep spiritual things when you're working with real hypnosis, because things happen.
Yeah.
Getting to pick my weirdest one, I've thought about it, and it's hard because weird things happen every day, and weirdness is reality for me now. But when you said it, then the first one that popped in my mind is the one I'm going to say, and it wasn't one that popped up on my radar while I was thinking about it this week. I had a student come to a class who had a debilitating back problem. She had an accident, hurt her spine, and was in agonizing pain every single day. And she noticed that during the class, she wasn't in agonizing pain every day. And I thought, oh, well, this is just something simple. It's like just her mind's realizing the power of hypnosis. We're going to be able to get rid of this quite easy, and it's going to be great. She said when the class was ending, it was starting to come back. And so I said, well, let's do some hypnosis and see if I can make that stick and stay. So it's not just while you're in a room with me, it's forever. And we did that, and I thought it was just going to be basic direct suggestion, some couple of idiomotor questions, and that was it. And so I asked to speak to the part of mind that was taking that pain away, and her throat started jolting, and she was like nearly dry reaching sort of thing, and eventually words spat out of her mouth. And I started talking to this old dude. And this old dude identified himself as her spirit guide, essentially. And she had a mission in life, and she was not doing it. Her mission in life was to be a healer, and mostly to do channeling and psychic-based things, and she wasn't doing that. She had worked in a normal sort of job. I won't say what it is to give her more privacy with that. And it was a very square sort of job, and she wouldn't get out of it. He pushed her down the stairs, is what he told me in this. He made her have this accident to get her the hell out of that job. And her being in the room with me, he was taking that pain away to try and say to her, this, chase this. So I bargained with him to go, well, if she keeps following down this path, will you keep it away? And it's stayed away ever since. I had to bargain, though. He was like, no, this was just her window to say this can happen. He was going to keep the pain there as the driver to keep her going. I said, well, as long as because there is a back problem whenever she's with a doctor, I want you to give it to her then, so that the doctors can assess her properly. And she's had 2 assessments with doctors since then. And she said as soon as she pulls up the car park, it's agonizing. She has trouble getting out of the car. They like touch a muscle on her back and see pain rippling of things you can't fake, like body reactions that are happening. And it was because of this old dude that's her spirit guide that is pushing her to do her life's soul's mission, pushed downstairs. And he has very, very strange ways of talking. It's quite spooky in a way. But its effect on her life was shit. It was terrible. It does not sound like a helpful spirit guide, but it's what he had to do to get her to her path. And he loves me. He has a great chat with me every time. Anytime I put her in trance, he now pops out and wants to say hello and check in, whether he's got anything to talk to me about or not. He just wants to say hello because he likes me, because I'm helping him help her. And half the time, she doesn't like him because he's bossy and he's pushy. But he's got her best intentions at heart. So I think that would probably be one of them. But that's like daily life. I have conversations with weird things through people all the time. Half the time it's completely inside of them. Half the time it's completely outside of them. I have had more than half a dozen people find me because of something else. They haven't known me, and they've had a spiritual experience where something has told them, go see Lance Baker, and they've had to Google me and find me.
Wow.
From a spirit communication happen. That weirds me out a little bit, that I've got this beacon out there that spirits can find me and connect their people with me through those different sort of ways. That's been confirmed multiple times now. I find that really curious and strange and puzzling, comforting and disconcerting at the same time. I'm glad it's in positive ways and I'm there to help people, but it's that blows my mind.
There's another story you shared with me, and I'm not going to share it here, but it involved a spirit that I'm somewhat familiar with, and just I like what you have to say there, Lance, that it's tough to go through some of this stuff and not realize, not think that that's just certain stuff.
Yeah, that wasn't at the top of my radar too. It should have been, yes. Asmodee, I've had to bargain with Asmodee to release somebody from a curse that a magician had put on her in a previous life. I had to bargain with the djinn that was affecting her. I had to bargain with the magician from the previous life that had put it on her. And then to get that cleared, I had to speak with Asmodee. And this woman knew nothing about any of that. She just knew she had something freaky going on. And I at that point was scared. I hadn't done anything with Asmodee before. And I was like, hey, Doug, what should I be looking out for here? I just had a conversation with this, and I'm a little concerned because I just made a pact and cleared something. And is that going to come back on me? And it hasn't.
No.
I've been good. But that bizarre stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I had no idea of that connection of Asmodee with Jinn either. Yeah. You filled that dot in for me, and I was like, why is this? And so with that as well, I know that wasn't some suggestion that I had of leading it at all with that. It was like, it was real. That was the bit that had puzzled me. It was, well, why was he involved?
It's an old spirit, goes way back, Asmodee, way back. Devin, let's get weird.
I'm gonna actually go very mundane.
What?
Because that's the wizard's way of which you tell me to zig, I'm gonna zag every time. So I think I want to come back to this idea of priming, and I'm not trying to explain away anything, but I think the different vibes lead you in different directions, and then that unconscious mind goes in that way. I think a lot of the history of hypnosis, people have found theories that then create a sort of feedback loop because they're like, I figured out what it is, and they have that expectation, and that leads everyone they work with to do it, which I think we talked about NLP at the beginning. NLP has all of this IQ stuff where your eyes will go in this way if you're doing visual or whatever. And my theory on that, because it doesn't hold up outside of NLP workshops, is that when you have a bunch of people that have learned this, they do it. Like, you can train your unconscious to, when you do that, your eye will now move in that direction. And so it creates it rather than you've identified a standalone phenomenon. So in my practice, I do not advertise that I'm also a wizard. I made the choice to kind of split these. So as a wizard, happy to talk about that I'm a hypnotherapist. As a hypnotherapist, I only bring up that I'm a wizard if clients find me through that and want to go in that direction. And so I see clients that are Googling hypnotherapist. My website is very straightforward. I wanted to kind of have this cool college professor. I wanted to get people who are interested in microdosing, but not I'm here for the crystal cleansing past life regression. And I'm operating out of an office with other therapists. There's white noise machines in the hallway. There's, motivational posters. There is a therapeutic context. So I have not had the same experiences where people, demons have not shown up in any of my sessions with clients. But what I've found that I think is extremely powerful is that we think, especially when we're into magic, that the bigger the fireworks, the more better and important it is. If I'm going to really be a magician, I need to cut some of the big demons and have the candles in the room blow out when they appear. And it needs to be cinematic, like a movie. But I found two really interesting things in working with clients. One, a lot of what I'll do will be sort of this time traveling to go back to this experience and see that younger self when they were going through a hard time and the parents were shitty and didn't show up. And the adult now relives not just the experience, but how would they show up and give that younger self what they wanted and needed in that moment. So basically like, oh, I'm remembering this birthday where my dad got drunk and didn't show up and I was crying in my room. And I'm like, okay, like you're in the room with that little boy. What do you want to do? They're like, I'm just giving them a hug. And it's so simple. It's so simple. And yet then the client comes back next week and they're like, everything is better. Holy shit. And it's not like we need to have like 25 sessions and get this whole narrative about change. Like creating that connection has a profound result. Similarly, what I'll do, kind of like wise self, holy guardian angel, whatever you want to call it. Like, let's go to the deepest, wisest part of you that you can connect with. Those voices tend to be very similar. And it's hilarious where it's often quite cliche. Like, what is that voice telling you? It's okay. These things that I'm worried about, they're okay. They're part of life. I'm going to be okay. I'm not defined by this. It's a pretty simple message, but then it's really amazing how whatever they're tapping into is pretty consistent across the board. We're all getting down to something that, whether this is just the cultural bath that produces us, and we all have, some therapy book that sat on our parents' shelf called I'm Okay, You're Okay, that like, is what we reach for. I don't know, but it is really amazing that like when I can talk to that voice of the client, it's just different, and it's different from who they are, but it's the same as that voice for everybody, which is really wild.
That's very cool, Devin. Yeah. No books flying off the shelf. No, any kind of thing hasn't happened while you've been doing hypnosis or anything.
I've been amazed by the creative places that clients go to and the variety of those experiences and what comes up for people. But yeah, I haven't had anything like overtly paranormal happen. And yeah, I have not had any like, well, I will say, what Lance was talking about of like they like puked up a word. I've seen that quite a bit. Like it really does feel like this weird surgery where they'll stutter and they can't say it and they're like, and it's like pulling this word out and then bringing that from the unconscious to the conscious is such a like it's like having a bowel movement when you've been constipated. It's just like,
right.
Whoa, wow, I didn't realize I was really backed up.
Let me ask you this then, Devin. Do you think that hypnosis and the occult and magic can intersect? Do you think that there is a way that one can combine practical magic and hypnosis? Because I know a lot of people, particularly those who are of the more it's part of my will bent, who refuse to do hypnosis. They're like, I'm not going anywhere close to hypnosis. What do you think about hypnosis and practical magic?
I don't think they can be unlinked. I think they are so closely bonded. I come from a more psychological approach to magic. I was, blown away and started my path by reading Grant Morrison's Arthur Magazine interview, and that put it in this psychological frame, which has now gone out of vogue, and we want to believe in a more animist thing or whatever. Right. But and I'm not dismissing that, but I personally resonate with the psychology approach, and I always thought the idea of magic as a way to get the unconscious out of the mind, to basically be like, hey, here's a dog and pony show, look over here, and here's what we really want to accomplish. Like, I think that is hypnotic in nature. The ritual and the induction are ways to embed the suggestion of here's the direction that I want to move in. I think the unconscious mind is the operator behind the scenes. And my earliest formulations about like, well, how would a sigil work? Is that your unconscious mind can pick up on clues that you aren't, that steers you to that person at the party who then is like, you need a roommate? I have a place opening up in my house. And it's like, what led you to that? And I think there is this power of the unconscious mind that we don't understand. I think anyone that is practicing magic and is not exploring trance or at least looking into hypnosis is doing themselves a grave disservice. And I have experienced that by like, going to attend like a past life regression workshop thing, and they were just not using hypnotic language and it wasn't very effective. And it was like, hey, I get the whole like, I got a hammer, everything's now a nail. The modality religiosity that they talk about in therapy, where you get your system and everything fits into that. But come on, people. Like, we've got hundreds of years of people figuring out some techniques that work well, that are worth experiencing, and to cut yourself off from that just doesn't make sense to me. I don't get why you would want to practice these things. I think historically, it was that idea of the highly imaginative people and that combination of hypnosis in ritual that got us the most, like, crazy, like, we're seeing demons and float like smoke, like fly around the room. Like, right. I believe that people experience that. But I think it was a collective experience that was created through those tools. So yeah, that's my take.
Lance, yourself, magic and hypnosis.
They've been paired forever. Like, you're a grimoire man. Is that great? Yeah. You like grimoires?
I like them.
It's there. Like, that had hypnosis before Mesmer had hypnosis. I'm pretty certain Mesmer was influenced by grimoire things from some of the things I've certainly read. But you look at scrying. What is it?
Yeah.
As eye fixation. It is creating trance to get hallucination thing happening, whether it's audio, visual, whether it's a sensory thing like a smell, a taste, a feeling of something else in the room. It happens because you've entered that trance state through an induction. You've
with
had
an
the
operator
rituals.
Who is less hypnotically, like I've had profound changes with hypnosis. Like, I have experienced it, but I am not in that group where I'm going to be the best person at the stage show and forget my name off the bat and all of that kind of stuff. I think similar to what you were saying, Lance. And I think I see that so much in John Dee and Edward Kelly, where John Dee is like, I'm not having this, but I can help other people have this. And yeah, but
exactly. Absolutely. It's the operator and the seer working together. There's the hypnotist and the subject. That's the process. And you have referenced, like, I've lost count over 20 times on your podcast. The book, if people want to get into magic, is 6 Ways.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up too. Yeah.
6 Ways is a book about it's just hypnosis and energy healing. I'm kicking my podcast has been on hiatus for years. I recorded my first episode again a couple of days ago, and
nice.
Aiden is on my list of one of the first re-guests that I have to chase up, because I want him on there, because that book is my work. Like, it's energy healing and it's hypnosis. And yeah, whether it's self-hypnosis or hypnosis from somebody else, it's still hypnosis. When you're entering trance states yourself and you're giving yourself suggestions and finding different ways to do it. Pendulum work is hypnosis.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. And those people who say they're not going to do hypnosis because they're in the Golden Dawn, they do hypnosis.
Yeah.
They do it themselves. So they're having themselves on. But I get why it's part of their rule set. Like, if Crowley was a hypnotist, I'd be pretty paranoid about letting him hypnotize me, or I'd wake up pretty sore in some way or another because he wanted to have fun. I wouldn't trust the dude.
No.
But when that's involved in your history, I can see why there's a rule set like that, just in case. If when you saying your will is the intention of the thing there, you're not going to want to give that will to somebody else. But that's where there's the misconception about what hypnosis can be. To have somebody control your will, you've got to give them that anyway. And you can do hypnosis without giving that will up. But as I described at the very beginning with you, like, my process that I use quite often is getting this other part of you to take over the will of you to communicate. And that is what every magician is aiming to do, to get this insight from a deeper part of himself or some spiritual thing out of himself. Well, you need hypnosis.
And I think so I'm going to step on toes here, because I know that Doug is just a diehard Crowley apologist. And so I'm sorry that I'm going to offend you here. But I think this idea of true will is fascinating, especially when espoused by someone who suffered from crippling addictions throughout their life, and was clearly driven by them. And the framework that I have found so helpful, and it kind of emerges from two sources. One is called internal family systems, and I had a coworker at my old job, and I was describing how I approached wizardry, and she's like, "This is exactly what my therapist has me do," and brought me in this IFS book. And internal family systems is all about the idea that you have different parts within you that have different motives, and so when you keep getting belligerent and angry when you drink, that is a part that thinks that it needs to get belligerent and angry, and it has a positive intent. It's like, I'm the protector, I'm keeping us safe. And you need to have a conversation with that part where you're like, hey bro, I get what you're trying to do, but you're being an asshole, and we got to find a better way to do it. And if you don't listen to those parts, then they act out. But when you integrate them, you can work with them in a better way. And that's where I think like this idea of true will is, a client tells me they want to quit smoking, but they keep waking up and going to buy a pack of cigarettes. They're of two minds. One part of them is saying, I want to quit, this is killing me. And another part that they're not in touch with, they're dissociated from, says, this is how we manage stress. If we don't do this, how are we going to stress? Quitting's a bad idea, let's not do it. And so it's only by working with that part. And I think when you do that, you start to realize that it is, again, this stage metaphor where there is a spotlight and we have a cast of characters that is rotating through that I awareness identity, but they are taking turns, because the you that is like, oh my God, I'm so hungry, this food's going to be great. And the you that's like, oh, I just ate, I'm really full, like different, like different lenses, different way of seeing the world. The you that's like, I'm going to jog every day starting a New Year's. It's different than the you that wakes up and is like, oh, I'm supposed to fucking jog now? What are you talking about? I don't want to do this.
Right. I think for myself, I am endlessly fascinated with comparison, like Jeffrey Kripal style comparison. And within that, it's always a little bit sketchy when you look back at things that have happened in the past and you're trying to apply concepts to them. Like, is that hypnosis or is that something else? Right. But tied in with my love of comparison are these just a love of stories, right? Because I did a show about John Dee. And one of the things that I was talking about was that perhaps something different was going on than what they thought was actually going on. But the thing that always rubbed me in a wrong way, and they always, maybe not rubbing me in the wrong way, but always kind of irked me about the conversations, the angelic conversations, is that at one point, Edward Kelly, who people who all knew him said he couldn't speak a lick of Latin, couldn't speak a word of Latin. For one of these sessions, he speaks perfect Latin to John Dee, complete perfect Latin. John Dee these weren't scripted answers. John Dee was himself shocked. And he decided to start talking back to Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly answers perfectly. Never did he speak Latin again. That's interesting to me. Other things that are interesting is I came across a story in Colin Wilson's Beyond the Occult, where he talks about a hypnotist in the 1880s who brought somebody up on stage and hypnotized this person and said that there's a spirit of a philosopher, let's say Socrates, in the corner of the room there. Have a conversation.
Right.
And this guy proceeded to first be like embarrassed, like, oh my God, like Socrates is in the room. But he stumbled over his words, but then he proceeded to talk to this spirit in the corner. And as just like the story that Devin told earlier, he was like a translator. So he would tell the audience the conversation that he was having with Socrates. And then the hypnotist went on to do other things with newer philosophers, contemporary philosophers. And the person would answer as if it was just the most natural thing in the world. And the ideas that were expressed were so beautiful in the audience. So I have to ask you two gentlemen, do you think that hypnosis in a way can be used to enhance what we could call the unknown powers of the mind/universe? Because what even is mind, to render to us what many would consider occult abilities for which many seem out of reach or only possible through constant practice? Devin.
So I want to mix a few metaphors here and talk about the elephant in the room, which brings us back to that idea of the blind men feeling the elephant.
Yeah.
And I think when we're talking about this is the elephant, like occult phenomenon, all of these things, we're coming up against this thing. And the mistake we make is we go, I'm touching the tusk, which I've called hypnosis. Therefore, this is all hypnosis. This is all what it is. And so I think all of this is hypnosis, but hypnosis is not just the thing that we think hypnosis is. It's so much larger and broader. Right. So that's the entry point that I have. But I think we're all talking about the same thing, and it's a mistake to use our own little sliver of it to then create generalities. There's a book called Hidden Depths by Robin Waterfield that is just one of the best histories of hypnosis. Like every hypnosis book gives you like Mesmer, Braid, Erickson, and this like same kind of, you have to like skip the first 40 pages of any hypnosis book to get something new out of it. But this is so in depth, so well researched, and the author has a very good take where it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and rejecting all of the paranormal, but it's not getting caught up and saying all of this is real. And when they go through and talk about the history of hypnosis and mesmerism, weird occult shit pops off all the time. Well documented sources of people that were having experiences and recollected lives and like all of this weird stuff that we can't really explain, mixed in with stuff that was clearly fraud. Like, right, there was a lot of like fraud and stage magic and like, you know, people where they claim something and then it was debunked. But there is another portion of it that is just really fascinating, and that's where I love staying agnostic and saying I got no fucking clue what's going on here. Yes. But I bet if you got a bunch of professional stage hypnotists together, they could spend hours telling you stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, performing, comedic timing, just what came out in a stage show that person would not have accessed in any normal circumstance.
Like Devin just touched on, like the occult movement, it's evolved out of this. Like the Theosophical Society and the Spiritualist movement, both of them, like the crux of what held it together was hypnosis. The term seance is like known throughout the world as like the key word of witchcraft if somebody wants to talk about like communicating with the spirit. Like it entered our world as the terminology for a gathering of hypnotists. Like a hypnotist would be there and put somebody in a trance to communicate with the spirit. And as Devin said, lots of people did fraudulent things with this, but lots of things were real. I've mentored with a lot of different people to get the best I can, and I still will continue to do so to get better. And one of my mentors, he taught me a very, very, very valuable tool: real or imagined. Of walking away and going, well, this could be real, it could be imagined. Do an and/or situation. For the client's mental health, for your mental health, think both. Whatever is working for them, work with that for them. But when you're walking away with a question of, was this something else? I go, well, it could be. Like with the Dee and Kelly thing, it could be Kelly's subconscious has learnt Latin from hearing it from Dee all the time, that it's pieced together it, and it knows it, and he's got it back there. And the creativity and intelligence of his subconscious mind was able to use it in that moment and just wow Dee with that. And Kelly wasn't able to tap into that resource any other time, but it was all completely inside of him. Or it could have been something outside of him, like his holy guardian angel or one of the spirits that they were trying to commune with that was just talking through Kelly 2D.
Or it could have been research and study and asking around and learning how to say in perfect, precise Latin, this angel just said we should sleep with each other's wives.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah, just like, I will never mention a word of Latin to anybody else so that this is cool and it sticks and I don't get caught out.
Right.
You don't know. So it's healthy to walk away thinking, yes, Both, either, whatever. And so I very much often observe something and I'm like, yeah, I'm on the fence of whether this is real or not. There was a past life regression I did 6 months ago. And it was in an open environment, so other people were there. There were viewers watching, and this girl, like everybody that's into witchcraft, they're in a past life they're a witch, and they were
Of course
killed for being a witch, and that's why they have trouble promoting being a witch. And so when she started doing that, straight away I'm like, okay, this could be a metaphor for her subconscious, like trying to play out that scenario. And then she starts saying she was in America, and she's describing being taken to the castle to be executed. And where was it? Lancaster, I think it was. So the name was a place that is in Europe. And one of the people in the audience is Googling it. And there was a castle in America where they did witch hangings. And she's quiet and she's like looking it up. And then it gets to the carriage she's on. I was presuming the whole time she's going to say she's going to get burnt. And she's like, they're going to hang me. And she described the river that was there. She described this castle perfectly. And it was the last place in America that they did hangings. And later on, that castle became a prison. But the whole way through the process, until the person in the audience after the session was like, look at this. I was like Googling this as she's going through. I was sitting there going, yeah, this is bullshit. This is just her mind creating it. And then at the end, I was like, okay, I was wrong. This could be real. But it could be that girl at some stage had read that story and her subconscious mind did know that and did create that and let that out. She says she didn't. And she most likely didn't. But she could have been exposed to it and not paid attention to it. It could have been something that she overheard somebody talking about when she was 4 and her subconscious mind absorbed it. So I like to hold all of this in my mind. And I thank Bob greatly for highlighting that lesson for me so that I have my sanity and I can also look after the client's like concerns best. Like if I can work in both areas and tick both boxes, the change will stick. If I just tick one box, the change is most likely not going to stick because I might be wrong and I've ticked the wrong box. But if you can apply for either or, and you're going to feel safer, you're going to be fine. And I don't care at the end of the day. It's all story. So I don't care if it's a real story or a fake story, as long as the result at the end of the day, if what my client needs is real, then I'm happy.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think it was in one of the disinfo books about sex, but there was just a whole collection of like anecdotal things of people having these like spontaneous, crazy out of body experiences, like during sex, like I'm having sex with my partner and suddenly like I'm them, or there was like, and then suddenly I'm like in a village in India in the 4th century and like these like things. And I remember there was a study where they were doing DMT and it was like via IV in the late 90s. And there were similar stories of people being like, I didn't see fractals. I saw things as clear as day and like lived this whole other experience. So I don't know what this is, but there definitely seems to be something that people tap into where, I mean, we have this every night with dreams. Yeah. We have dreams that we wake up from and we're like, what a cool plot that was. Who came up with that?
Yeah, I had a dream. I woke up yesterday morning. I was telling my partner about it. It just blew me away. It was bizarre. My class started at 9:30. It starts at 9:30 today as well. But I woke up and the dream had ended with, it's 9:30. This is to be continued. We'll pick this story up later. And it was like a TV show where they like just break it quickly and like, to be continued. And I was like, that was bizarre for a dream. And it wasn't. It was 7:30. It wasn't 9:30. But my class was at 9:30. So my consciousness knew we've got to get up and do the thing. It was half hour before my alarm went off, but it was on the dot of 7:30. And it helped for me to be up earlier and be ready earlier and all the rest. And I was like, was that my mind? Was it something else? Like, it's just interesting.
The subconscious is an incredible timekeeper. It's like, that's one of the wildest things when you start doing self-hypnosis where you're like, I want to go into trance for 15 minutes and I'll set an alarm to like make sure I don't fall asleep and go over, and then I'll kind of come out naturally, and I'm like, and it's 15 minutes on the dot has passed. Like they'll do stage hypnosis tricks like that too, where they'll be like, in this amount of time, you're suddenly going to stand up and yell the word dog or whatever. And then they're continuing on with the show. And then that person suddenly feels compelled because that mind, we have a much better sense of time than we realize.
Well, here's the thing, and I'm going to jump in right here because that goes with the question that I asked. I am exceptional at times. And you can put a timer on. I'll probably say the timer is going to go off in the next 10 seconds, and it will. I got like that from working in a kitchen for nearly 10 years. I had to be good at timing. So that took a lot to actually get there. I'm still good at it. And there's no other, I actually don't think I'm tapped into some superpower. I trained because I would do this for hours, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, right? So hypnosis, do you think, guys, that magicians can teach themselves hypnosis to get better at some of this stuff? This is the last question. This is the last question to ask here. Can magicians teach themselves how to do this stuff? Or do they require somebody else?
So real quick, I want to say all skills go through that process that you described.
Yeah.
Whenever you learn something new, you're learning it consciously, and your conscious mind is a clumsy fool. And it's like, I'm trying to hold the golf club in the right way, and it feels awkward. When you do the repetition, then as soon as you grab the golf club, you move your hands in the right place. You adjust.
Right.
Like you adjust in all of these ways that you're not consciously aware of, that, this club is slightly heavier than the one that I normally use. It's windier today. When you have those skills, you're not doing the math. Your unconscious mind is doing it just like that.
Right.
But in terms of, can people learn hypnosis? Yes. I would say everyone can learn hypnosis. Some people, I think, are better at some of the basics of like rapport and stuff than others, which is why when you try and have an NLP pickup artist class, you get people that are like creepy robots using like, I'm mirroring you and that's making you more turned on. And the woman's like, I am so fucking uncomfortable. I've never been less comfortable in my life. And I think just a caveat for people that want to go out and learn about hypnosis books are beautiful and frustrating. They're beautiful because there's so much interesting information, but they're frustrating because people will state things that you don't get to see. Like, so this client immediately does this. And you're like, what? And you brought up Ellman earlier. I'm currently reading Ellman's book. And it's frustrating because he talks about his very rapid induction, where it's basically like, close your eyes, pretend you can't open them, try and open them, pretending that you can't open them. You're now in trance. And now your hand is numb. And he like makes it sound so quick. Whereas if I read that and I go, hey, honey, come in here. I want to try and hypnotize you. Close your eyes. Pretend you can't open them. Now, I'm going to touch your hand with this pin and it's not going to hurt. It's going to hurt. Like, There's so much more. And again, the culture of the time, if you're reading something that Mesmer wrote about dealing with a peasant in the village when you're an aristocratic lord, it works differently. So I think the best thing that you can do if you're interested in hypnosis is go see a hypnotist. Like it's a cool experience. And if you find, like go find one that you like in your area, if you can find one that seems like a vibe that you resonate with, but that one-on-one experience is so much deeper, I think, and so much like better at getting someone who's not sure if they can be hypnotized to that. That's great. Hypnosis tapes are good. And I think a good way to kind of get in that groove and like learn. And then I think those two set you up for more success with self-hypnosis and then figuring out how to incorporate that into your magical practice. But I think getting that that real first-person experience will be very valuable because you'll know what the feelings that you are trying to work with much more clearly than I read a pamphlet and now I don't know if it's working or not. And then you have that doubt, which is getting in the way.
Lance, what do you think?
I think, yes, anybody can learn hypnosis. Anybody can learn self-hypnosis. You can learn it by yourself. The first time I did self-hypnosis, I did it by myself. I did it in the shower and got results. But I'd had some hypnosis training first. So I was primed. It was easier. Lots of the people Ellman worked with were primed because they'd been in his classroom for a while. But I've listened to 20-something hours worth of Ellman's recordings of his classes. And I've heard doctors bring in a patient that he's never met before and they haven't really been primed other than you go on to see the hypnotist. And he's been able to do that But in that, they're primed because they've come to see the hypnotist that's the amazing guy that I'm giving out my valuable time to go and learn from. So he does get results quicker. But I've got a resource that I'm going to give everybody listening to this of a self-hypnosis process that's very different to the normal sort of self-hypnosis. Has nothing to do with the Milky Way's sort of way. It's nothing to do with like the normal listen to a recording of some sexy voice telling you to enjoy going down this pathway and seeing this thing and relaxing and blah, blah, blah. It's about opening up communication with a part of your consciousness. As Devin was talking about, these internal parts of these different bits of your consciousness. I only have 2 videos because of that. I've got 2 different conferences I've talked at before where I created a class for this. One explaining parts therapy of these inner dynamics and how to communicate with them. And it's an hour worth of understanding of that. And then the one that's really important for everybody at home with the self-hypnosis stuff is of how to set up this communication with one of those parts of your consciousness. And I guide people through it to kind of set it up so it's nearly a one-on-one. And a massive percentage of people who've watched this have been able to get it straight away. Some don't, because it's not one-on-one. So as Devin was saying, a one-on-one thing with somebody is going to give you a lot better result, but you can't have a one-on-one session with somebody for free. Whereas they're going to have this resource so you can have a play and see and do something for free yourself. And if it doesn't work for you, well, then yes, find a local person or find somebody on Zoom like myself, or I'm going to presume Devin does Zoom consultations as well.
I've got one in 20 minutes.
Okay, we got to wrap up soon.
So yes, you can reach out to somebody like that, book it and experience it and have it. And I'd recommend doing it again with a different one and have a very different experience, and you'll have a very different understanding of hypnosis. So I think everybody can do hypnosis.
Wonderful.
The one self-hypnosis tip I'll quickly add in, when I was doing my training, I was like, okay, so I'll start doing self-hypnosis that I'm talking to myself in my internal monologue about, I'm walking down the path, I'm relaxing my feet, like I'm going through the whole thing. But then as I start to go into trance, I go into that hypnagogic dreamy state and I sort of lose the plot. I'm not able to do that. And my professor was like, great, then you're there. Like, stop worrying about it at that point. And so the process that I started to use is basically very magical. Like, you set your intent and you say it like out loud to yourself. I want to go into a trance to let go of feeling tired after work and get motivated to work on editing my podcast for 15 minutes. You set the time, you set this thing, and then you close your eyes and you start doing that process. And then when you get into that kind of like drifty, dreamy, what was I just thinking about thing, just let it ride. Just trust that your unconscious is working. You don't have to be so in control. And what I will find is that it feels like when you're taking a nap and you almost fall asleep, but then you have that moment where you're like, I don't think I'm going to get back. Like, I think that was as deep as I was going to go. And you start to come like more awake, and that will happen. And then I'll look at the time and it's 15 minutes later. And then I'll actually be like, all right, yeah, let's go. Let's get on with the podcast now. Like, let's go. And like, it really, and it's that same thing with magic where it's not like I immediately notice it. It's at the end of the night where I'm like, oh man, what a great night this was. I really got so much work done. Oh, and I did that hypnosis like after I was working. I was so tired. I thought that seemed terrible. So yeah, that's where I find it really, really helpful.
Gentlemen, this has been perhaps maybe one of my favorite episodes to record. I've learned so much. There's this character I have to find out. What is the Marquis de Puységur? Puységur. Yeah. I have to look this man up, but I want to thank both of you guys for coming on. And I really hope people get excited about hypnosis, and they're both right. It's a tool that's available. We need to use it. We need to use this tool. If you think that you're not of the variety you might be at one end of the bell curve, I say even give it a shot. You never know until you try it out. But this has been such a wonderful conversation. Lance, what do you got going, man? What's happening? You also got a book coming out. You said you're going to be starting the podcast up again. You're going to be turning that crank. Let us know where to find you and what's next.
My podcast, Akasha Talks, should have a new episode out by the time this episode's out. I had asked you before I'd paused things, so I'm hoping you're still keen.
Of course, always.
And I have, since you said this is going to be out by the end of November, there's a hypnosis conference, Hypno Summit, that's on in the middle of December. Everybody listening to this, there's going to be a free web address down the bottom that you can go attend that conference for free. Cool. They will send you an email to offer you to pay extra money to keep that conference videos for life and all the rest as well.
Right.
But there's the ability to watch it for free and join it for free for a short time. I have sessions one-on-one that I do with people in person or on Zoom. I have classes online and in person. Most of them are in person, but some are online for energy healing and for hypnosis. The book, all my books are going to be a long time off. Like, I'm translating 3 books and I'm writing my own book. And my own book, I think it's feeling now more and more that it's not going to be a book. The book I sent you is more now looking like it's going to be the map of a digital class. First, because it just feels more and more modular to me than a book. I don't know. So yes, of what's coming, I don't know. I'll ride those waves when they hit me. Sure. But you've got the conference you can go to. You can contact me for a session. You can enjoy listening to me yammer on. To Doug, I've got Gordon agreed to come on as well. And I'm going to hassle out Aiden if you'll read my email and get an exception to come on. My first one that I recorded the other day is an astrological reading on Australia to get the psychology of Australia and a forecast based off Australia for next year.
Cool. Lance, where can they find your work? What's the web URL, if you will? branchesofhealing.com.au. If they've got questions about what we've talked about, I'm happy to talk to people too. I'm easy to find on social media. And Lance at branchesofhealing.com.au is my email. If you've got a question, hit me up. Perfect. Lance, thank you so much for being on the show. Devin, where can people find your work? This podcast is a ritual, still going strong. Let the people know what's going on in your world.
Yeah. So November 30th is a few days from us in chronological time. It's wherever it is related to you in magical time, podcast time. But that's the anniversary of my original ritual to become a wizard. So It'll be 8 years. It's working out great. And 4 years of doing this podcast as a ritual. So the big exciting news, if you liked my previous appearance on What Magic Is This, you'll love not only the one you just heard, but the third appearance when I'm back to talk about the book that I'm almost finished writing. I'm in the last fun dregs, slightly better, a wizard's guide to wizardry in theory and practice. And so that's where I'm finally distilling all of this stuff down and putting it out into the world. So for more wizardry, personisawake.com or at Person is Awake on Instagram. It's really the only social media I use. And then when I take off my pointed cap and do my hypnosis, that's changeyourmindky.com. And yeah, I see remote clients, and I always love clients that reach out knowing about the wizard side, because then not only can we use the magical framework that you have within trance and utilize that, but I love being able to help people create rituals and combine the unconscious hypnosis work with really fun, cathartic stuff that activates that unconscious mind. Like nothing, beats destroying a pinata to get over a shitty ex, or those things that really help the unconscious mind create that story of the change you're looking for. So personisawake.com, changeyourmindky.com, hit me up either or. Wonderful. I love being on What Magic Is This?
Oh, thanks, guys. This has been, again, I'm just going to say this has been such a fascinating. I've learned so much, and I'm psyched to learn even more. Pun certainly intended. So please be sure to check out every single one of the show notes in this episode. There's going to be a lot of really great ones, as well as Lance is going to have some videos up there to help with some kind of self-hypnosis. that you just have to give it a shot. You have to give it a try. But that is available at whatmagicisthis.com. Also on whatmagicisthis.com, you can find links to my Twitter account, my Facebook account, as well as my Instagram account. If you enjoy what I'm doing here at What Magic Is This and you want to support, there are 3 ways of doing that. Here we go. The first is the best, and that is through Patreon. Head to patreon.com/whatmagicisthis or head to whatmagicisthis.com and you will find any number of links to my Patreon account. It is only $7 a month. That's all I'm asking. That's 2 cups of coffee at a fancy coffee place. That is the price of a houseplant, albeit a small one. That is almost nothing, and that goes to help make What Magic Is This the podcast that it is. It keeps me alive. This is my job. I really don't get paid a lot for the amount of work that I do, but I love what I do, and I hope that it shows. Again, it's just like a totally different podcast. We go over a lot of really interesting content there, things about certain entities and spirits and saints. I have videos about how to do certain things. There's a video going to be up there about how to make magic circles for Solomonic magic. I just did an episode about how to start with Solomonic magic. All of this content, this completely different show, is only available through Patreon, and that's only for $7 a month. That is all I am asking. Again, I think I'm doing something pretty cool. If you want to support the show, I would appreciate it. It keeps this podcast ad-free. I really don't want to put ads in here, and so that is the best way of supporting my work. It also gives you access to a wonderful Discord server where there's a lot of really great individuals, people who have been doing magic for a long period of time, as well as people who are just starting out. And Lance and Devin, they're in there on the Discords. If you have any questions you want to ask, you can ask it there, and they will most likely answer when they can. But yes, Patreon, best way of supporting me. Patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, $7 a month. If you don't like the whole paying every month thing, you can send me any amount of money, $5, $10, $20, $500, any amount helps. It all goes back into helping What Magic Is This. It just goes to pay for all of the expenses that I have for this podcast, and it's not cheap. If you want to put out a good podcast, it's going to cost you money. And my goodness, those bills, they add up every month. And for some reason, I think it's the inflation. I know a lot of people are raising their prices on their Patreon and other subscription services. There's a reason. Things are getting expensive. And I understand that things are expensive for you guys as well. But yes, any amount of money would be greatly appreciated. You can head to What Magic Is This, find any one of the PayPal links there. Just click it. Any amount helps. I had somebody recently for my birthday. They gave me $100, so that is greatly appreciated. And yes, that all goes back into the show. You're just making sure that the fires here at What Magic Is This stay stoked, and that I have as great of a product for each and every one of you as I do. Also, a way of supporting the show is through merchandise. There was just a huge sale on for Black Friday. Sorry if you missed it, but there was like 40% off anything. So that was like mugs, t-shirts, fridge magnets, notebooks, hoodies, tote bags, oh man, pins, stickers, all of that. Pillows. There's pillows. Do you want to have pillows? Great. There's have a pillow fight. Have a What Magic Is This pillow fight. That would be fun, right? Anyways, but any amount of merch that you want, any kind of merch, a lot of it is there, and I get a little bit of money from it, not too much, but you can show your support for the show, and it's a really great way of letting the world know that you love this thing that I do. But the place I want to see you most of all is the Patreon. Again, $7 a month, patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. Let's keep this thing as my life, and I can hopefully do this for as long as possible, but I can't do it without your support. And yes, I really don't want to have ads on here. I know my last episode, I kind of had like a little bit of a beg fest, right? Like, please give me some money. But I really do need your support to help keep me doing the thing that I do and devoting as much time as I do on this podcast as I do. This is my job. I wake up, I give it 10 hours a day, 6-7 days a week sometimes. So it'd be nice to see your support. If you are able to support, I really hope that you can. But all of those things, including the wonderful show notes and some videos that Lance is going to have there, as well as links to both Lance and to Devin's places on the interwebs to get in contact with them should you need to. All of those things and more available at whatmagicisthis.com. Gentlemen, thank you so much again for appearing on the show, and we'll definitely check in with you a little bit further on down the line. We have to. Both of you are some of my favorite people to talk to, and so this has been an absolute pleasure. And we'll have a lot of things in the show notes on this one. So that's the show, everybody. Hypnosis. So come on back to What Magic Is This? We'll talk about more of this trance-like, mesmerizing thing that we like to call magic, the occult, and the esoteric. Until then, I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, stay hopeful, stay luminous. Could we get a goodbye from both of you gentlemen?
Goodbye. Thank you, Doug.
No worries. Devin.
And so, Doug, I just want you to take a deep breath. And as I count from 1 to 3, you can return to the room feeling like you did a wonderful podcast. And this was all your own idea.
I did a wonderful podcast.
1,
this is all
feeling that energy coming back, that good feeling of recording a really killer podcast.
It was
2,
great.
And coming all the way back on 3. There you go. And welcome back, Doug.
Oh, man. I think I recorded a pretty great podcast.
I think so, too.
Thanks, guys.
Evan, we should have got him to put his pants back on first.
Oh my goodness. Love you both. Thank you so much for being on the show. And yes, come on back to What Magic Is This? We'll keep it going. Ta for now, everybody. Bye-bye.